Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jastine Valdez. On May 19, 2018, 24 years old Jastine Valdez went about her daily routine as usual. After finishing paperwork for her residency permit, she went to the gym and worked out until around 4:20 p.m. Then, she planned to head home. Her mother, Terrace, asked her to pick up some bread on the way, so Valdez stopped at the store before catching the 185 bus to Bray, which left after 6:09 p.m. The bus dropped Jastine off at a familiar stop near her rural home, from which she normally walked the final 15 minutes to her doorstep. However, when Jastine failed to arrive home, her mother Terrace became worried. Terrace was used to Jastine being on time and communicating regularly, but when she couldn't reach her daughter by phone or message, she started to get anxious. As the hours passed with no word from Jastine, Terrace decided to go out and look for her. Terrace's daughter Jastine was expected to return home by bus, but when she failed to arrive, Terrace became increasingly worried and frantic. She stopped people on the street and asked if they had seen Jastine, describing her Asian features and the sporty clothes she was wearing. Despite several people claiming to have spotted Jastine getting off the bus, her disappearance remained a complete mystery. Terrace's worry escalated as each passing minute brought no new information about Jastine's whereabouts or safety. Terrace was overwhelmed by anxiety and eventually reported Jastine missing to the police, in the hope that they could locate her. Detectives promptly started investigating Jastine's vanishing and initiated a thorough search. They looked into her daily routine and questioned people who knew her to explore every possibility, including whether Jastine had left of her own free will. Jastine Valdez lived with her parents, Terrace and Daniel, in the quiet Irish countryside. Her parents had moved to Ireland from the Philippines in search of a better life and brought Jastine to join them in 2015. Despite struggling financially, Jastine's parents worked hard to support her education and well-being. Jastine was a responsible and diligent student, studying accounting at university while working part-time jobs to help pay for her studies and support her family. She worked as a waitress in Bray and as a childcare provider in her neighborhood, and even lived in the servant quarters of a large estate where her parents worked as a gardener and housekeeper. Jastine was known for being reliable, hardworking, and dedicated to her responsibilities. Given her close relationship with her family and her strong sense of duty, it was unthinkable that she would voluntarily leave them behind. Her limited social life and lack of typical teenage rebellion also made it seem unlikely that she would run away. Despite efforts to contact everyone who knew Jastine, no one had any information about her disappearance. As a 24 years old, Jastine had long since moved past her teenage years and was very close to her family, making it unlikely that she would run away. She kept her parents informed about her daily activities, and on the day she went missing, she and her mother exchanged 63 messages. The last message was at 6:24 p.m. when Jastine got off the bus. During the investigation, a crucial tip came from Jastine's coworkers. A woman who was driving by with her 12-year-old son reported a disturbing incident to the police. She claimed to have seen a man pushing a woman who looked like Jastine into the trunk of a black Nissan Qashqai. This incident happened just minutes after Jastine got off the bus, and the police were quickly alerted to the situation. A second motorist soon came across a disturbing scene. An Asian girl was sitting in the back of a vehicle, tapping on the window and clearly frightened. The driver was initially unsure of what to make of the situation, but after discussing it with his wife when he got home, he realized the seriousness of what he had seen. He immediately called the authorities at 7:20 p.m. to report a possible kidnapping. Around the same time, another driver contacted the police to report a suspicious Nissan vehicle driving erratically about 6 kilometers from NS car. Patrol officers quickly responded to the location given by the initial female caller. When they arrived, they found Jastine's broken cell phone and a bag of bread on the roadside, which raised serious concerns for her safety. Based on this evidence, investigators believed that the kidnapper had targeted Jastine while she was walking home from the bus stop. The kidnapper had tried to put Jastine in the trunk of the car, but she resisted. He then forced her into the back seat and drove away to an unknown location. The suspect's black Nissan was immediately put on the wanted list, and a large search effort began, involving patrol cars and helicopters. However, the search was difficult due to the darkness of the night, and no immediate leads were found. When daylight came, the search resumed, and detectives re-examined eyewitness accounts and narrowed down the list of potential suspects. Mark Hennessy, a 40-year-old man, was identified as a person of interest in the investigation because his appearance matched the description of the kidnapper. Police officers visited Mark Hennessy's home, but his wife, Nicola, had no idea where he was. She told them that he had left for a drink after work the day before and hadn't returned. This new information raised even more suspicions about Mark, leading investigators to look deeper into his past. Mark seemed like a model citizen. He was a devoted husband and father of 2 young daughters, with a stable job as an estimator on construction sites. He came from a respected family and lived in a wealthy neighborhood with other young families. He had no prior run-ins with the law and appeared to be a pillar of the community. However, the police knew that people can often hide their true nature behind a mask of respectability. Police officers visited the bar Mark had gone to the night before to ask questions and gather information. The bar staff confirmed that Mark had been there, but only stayed for a short time to have a beer and watch a soccer match around 5:40 p.m. He left the bar in a visibly agitated state and returned around midnight, staying only for 10 minutes before driving away in his car at 11 p.m. After further review, it was discovered that Mark had actually returned to the bar's entrance to chat with someone before leaving again. A review of the bar's CCTV footage confirmed the staff's accounts of Mark's brief visits. However, this still left a gap in his whereabouts between 5:40 p.m. and 11 p.m., and investigators remained unsure of what Mark had done during this time. Meanwhile, detectives also obtained CCTV footage of the bus route that Jastine had taken, which led to a disturbing discovery. Mark's black Nissan was spotted following the bus just 30 minutes after he left the bar, raising suspicions about his involvement in Jastine's disappearance. As the search for Mark's car and Jastine continued, it became increasingly clear that the incidents were connected, and Mark emerged as the prime suspect in her abduction. Despite efforts to track his cell phone, Mark managed to stay one step ahead of the authorities. He made a single call to his wife, telling her he would be away for a while, but refused to surrender to the police even when his family begged him to do so. The investigators learned about the encounter from Mark's parents, and as a result, they strengthened their search for Mark. However, Mark remained elusive. The police turned to the public for help, issuing appeals through the media and asking anyone with information about Jastine, Mark, or his car to come forward. One person responded to the appeal, spotting a Nissan that matched the description of Mark's car. She followed the vehicle to Cherrywood Park, where she observed the driver closely before notifying the authorities. When the police arrived, they found a man covered in blood sitting behind the wheel. Mark refused to leave his vehicle, even when police tried to persuade him. He threatened them with a knife, so they had to shoot him to protect themselves. The bullet hit Mark in the shoulder. When police took him out of the car, he was awake but not cooperating. They searched the vehicle, hoping to find Jastine, but she was not there. Police questioned Mark repeatedly, but he wouldn't answer. Medical staff treated his injuries, and he was rushed to the hospital. Doctors fought to save Mark's life, hoping he would reveal Jastine's location. Unfortunately, the bullet had bounced off and hit Mark in the head, killing him. Further investigation showed that the blood on Mark's face and body was his own, and he had several new stab wounds on his arm and neck. The police speculated that Mark, driven by a fear of being caught, had used a knife from his vehicle to prepare for a confrontation. When they finally caught him, the officers felt a sense of disappointment. They had found Mark and his vehicle, but their main goal was still unfulfilled. They had not found the missing person, Jastine. At the scene, they found a note, but it was difficult to read due to the presence of blood. The officers were, however, able to decipher the words "sorry" and "Pease Castle," which provided a lead in the search for Jastine. The search for Jastine Valdez continued despite the dim hopes of her safe return. As her anxious parents prayed for her well-being, a thorough search was conducted in a wooded area south of Dublin, guided by a cryptic clue found near a castle. The search yielded Jastine's purse, which contained her identification documents. Unfortunately, on May 21st, the search party discovered Jastine's body. The autopsy revealed that Jastine had been murdered on the evening of her abduction, with manual strangulation being the cause of death. Further examination showed that she had been subjected to a sexual assault, adding to the brutality of her demise. Amidst the sorrow and despair, a disturbing revelation emerged from the toxicological analysis. Jastine's body contained trace amounts of prohibited substances. The presence of these substances raised many questions, with no clear explanation for their origin or purpose. Add a surprising twist to the case. Test results showed that Mark had ingested a substantial amount of these substances, making the circumstances surrounding the tragic events even more complex and difficult to understand. Mark's life had been spiraling out of control due to his struggles with alcohol and substance abuse, which likely contributed to the drugs found in Jastine's system. His home life was also deteriorating, with frequent arguments with his spouse over his addiction and growing debts. Investigations revealed that Mark was actively using the dating app Tinder, where he was pursuing interactions with multiple women, including flirting with them at bars. Furthermore, his DNA was found on Jastine's body, solidifying the police's suspicions of his involvement in her abduction and murder. As detectives pieced together the evidence, a disturbing narrative emerged. The murder was driven by Mark's sexual motives, and Jastine became an innocent victim in his sinister quest. Mark had spotted Jastine while following a bus and seized the opportunity to grab her off the street in broad daylight, despite the presence of multiple witnesses. A thorough examination of the victims' and perpetrators' phones revealed that they had no prior connection or communication. They had never met before, and there were no mutual connections between them. This grim revelation highlighted the tragic randomness of Jastine's fate and the calculated brutality of Mark's actions. Upon closer examination, the detectives' initial assessment of the case changed significantly. It became clear that Mark was very familiar with the route Jastine often took, suggesting that her murder was planned in advance rather than a spontaneous act. Mark had been carefully watching her movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. The day of the abduction was a deliberate break from his usual routine, as he intentionally positioned himself at the bus stop, following Jastine's every move until he attacked her. The local community was deeply shaken by the tragic event, as such heinous acts were rare in their otherwise peaceful neighborhood. Many people rallied around the Jastine family, offering them comfort and support during their time of immense loss. At the farewell ceremony, heartfelt tributes were paid to Jastine, and white balloons were released into the sky, symbolizing hope in the midst of despair. Some attendees wore pink T-shirts with Jastine's image, a touching tribute to her memory. Jastine's family eventually decided to return to their native Philippines to lay her to rest, seeking comfort in familiar surroundings. However, they initially stayed abroad for a period before returning to Ireland in 2021, seeking a fresh start and new opportunities. They relocated to a different city and pursued new careers, which allowed them to heal from the painful memories that haunted them in their former home. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Daniel Wozniak. Sam Herr was born to parents Stephen and Raquel Kalberman on May 29, 1983, in Los Angeles, California. As their only child, Sam Herr was showered with love and attention from his parents, his father being a special education teacher and his mother a stay-at-home parent. Sam Herr maintained a close relationship with his parents even after he moved away. Despite his physically imposing stature, Sam Herr's friends affectionately referred to him as a gentle giant, describing him as a fun-loving and laid-back individual. Sam Herr enlisted in the United States Army at a young age and completed tours of duty in Afghanistan and Germany as part of the 173rd Airborne. After serving for 3 years, he was honorably discharged and returned to Southern California to pursue higher education using the GI Bill. His goal was to complete college and then re-enlist in the Army as an officer. To achieve this, Sam enrolled in Orange Coast Community College, where he befriended Julie Kibushi, who was 3 years his junior. However, Sam Herr struggled with the emotional aftermath of his military service, ultimately developing post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a common affliction among veterans. When 28-year-old Sam Herr failed to visit his parents' house over a weekend as planned, they began to worry. Sam Herr's parents, Stephen and Raquel, became increasingly concerned after several attempts to contact their son went unanswered. Deciding to take matters into their own hands, Stephen went to Sam Herr's apartment in Costa Mesa with his wife to see what was amiss. Their discovery led to immediate panic when they could not find their son and only saw Julie Kibushi in a state of horror. Stephen quickly dialed 911 as Raquel choked and screamed. The moment they realized Julie had met a gruesome end, they knew their lives would never be the same, and the trauma would have a lasting impact. The Costa Mesa community was shocked by the incident, as murders are rare there. At the apartment, police found no signs of a disturbance. The bedroom, however, presented a disturbing scene. On the bedside table, investigators found an unused knife, as well as 2 books, a combat manual and a sex guide. But it was the condition of the bed that was truly horrifying. The bed was soaked in the Julie Kibushi's blood, and the deceased Julie Kibushi was found in a compromising position, partially lying on the bed and partially kneeling on the floor. Her pants had been pulled down, exposing her lower body, leading detectives to suspect that she may have been sexually assaulted before her murder. The autopsy revealed that she had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, with 1 bullet entering the top center of her skull. Although a knife was found on the bedside table, it appeared to have been unused. Other unusual details included a tiara on the victim's head and the words, "All yours," scrawled on the back of Julie Kibushi's sweater. Julie Kibushi's handbag was found in the kitchen. The detectives identified the victim as 23-year-old Julie Kibushi, who was born on Valentine's Day in 1987 to a Japanese-American family. She was the first daughter and third of 4 children to parents June and Masa Kibushi. Her parents affectionately called her "my Valentine girl" from a young age. Julie Kibushi developed a passion for tap dancing at the age of 5, which continued to grow throughout her life. Those who knew her described her as a joyful person to be around, with a goofy and bubbly personality that could light up a room. Julie Kibushi was known for her kindness and willingness to go out of her way to help others. Julie Kibushi's life was a balance between her Japanese heritage and her independent American spirit. She had recently graduated from the Orange County School of the Arts and was pursuing a degree in fashion design at Orange Coast Community College. There, she befriended 26-year-old Sam Herr and even tutored him in anthropology. Little did she know, her kindness would ultimately lead to her tragic demise. The police investigation into Julie Kibushi's murder was underway. Detectives meticulously examined the crime scene, searching for clues that would reveal the truth about her final moments. Their attention turned to Sam Herr, as Julie Kibushi's body was found in his apartment. His sudden disappearance further raised suspicions. With evidence pointing to Sam Hare's involvement, investigators decided to take a closer look at him. Detectives suspected that Sam Hare had committed the crime in a moment of passion and then fled. This theory was supported by the fact that Sam Hare was nowhere to be found after the murder of Julie Kibushi in his apartment. The discovery of text messages from Sam Hare's number on Julie Kibushi's phone further fueled their suspicions. Initially, the messages seemed innocuous, with Sam Hare sending Julie Kibushi a text at 2:45 p.m. on May 21, 2010, telling her he would help a friend and then visit his parents. However, just 2 hours later, his messages took a drastic turn, as he frantically asked Julie Kibushi to come to his apartment. However, investigators interpreted these messages as evidence of Sam Hare's guilt, arguing that he had planned for Julie Kibushi to visit his apartment, which ultimately led to the murder. The disappearance of several key items from the apartment hinted at Sam Hare's possible flight. His passport and car were both missing, leading investigators to a straightforward conclusion: Sam Hare was on the run and likely the prime suspect in the crime. As the investigation continued, the Costa Mesa police tracked Sam Hare's cell phone and credit card activity to pinpoint his location. They discovered that his credit card had been used for 4 ATM withdrawals and a purchase at a pizza delivery place in Long Beach, California, just 20 miles from Sam's home. Police anticipated that Sam Hare would appear in the surveillance footage of the ATM. However, when the bank provided the footage, the police were shocked to see a teenager wearing a hoodie, not Sam Hare, withdrawing money from his account. Neither the police nor Sam Hare's parents could identify the mysterious boy. Investigators believed he was probably helping Sam Hare escape or hide. In either case, the Costa Mesa police were determined to find him. On May 26, 2010, they discovered that his credit card had been used for another pizza delivery, and they began tracing the delivery driver. Police went to an address provided by a tipster, expecting to catch Sam Hare, but instead found 17-year-old Wesley Freilich and his friends. Although initially suspected, authorities quickly cleared Wesley's name. However, they discovered that he possessed Sam Hare's credit card. Wesley told investigators a surprising story. He had been given the credit card by Daniel Wozniak, a local theater actor who had met Wesley through community theater. Daniel Wozniak claimed to be a bail bondsman and said he needed help collecting money from Sam Hare. Believing Wozniak's story, Wesley agreed to withdraw cash using the credit card, unaware of the true circumstances. A total of $1,900 was withdrawn from the account, sparking further investigation. The name Daniel Wozniak was familiar to investigators, who had previously found an invitation to his upcoming wedding in Sam Hare's apartment. This raised several questions. Who was Daniel Wozniak, and what was his connection to Sam Hare? Was he involved in helping Sam Hare escape, or was he a more sinister accomplice to the murder? These questions needed to be answered. To understand Daniel Wozniak's potential role, investigators looked into his background. Born on March 23, 1984, Daniel Wozniak was the youngest of 3 brothers. Due to his parents' demanding work schedules, he spent a significant amount of time with his grandparents after school. Daniel Wozniak grew up in a privileged household and was accustomed to luxury. Daniel Wozniak's journey to becoming an actor began in his early 20s. Despite struggling to hold down a job and often having to move to low-paying positions, his passion for acting and singing in musicals kept him going. It was during this time that he met his future wife, a fellow actress, and they eventually got married. However, their happiness was short-lived. On May 26, 2010, the day of Daniel Wozniak's bachelor party in Huntington Beach, California, police arrived with an arrest warrant. This unexpected turn of events linked Daniel Wozniak to the murder of Julie Kibushi, as it turned out that Sam Hare, the suspected killer, lived in the same apartment complex as Daniel Wozniak. Authorities believed that Daniel Wozniak may have helped Sam Hare escape or hide, leading them to assume he was involved in the crime. police arrested and questioned Daniel Wozniak. Initially, during interrogation, Daniel Wozniak claimed that his only wrongdoing was credit card fraud and that he had covered for his friend Sam Herr. He explained to investigators that he, Sam Herr, and Wesley had planned to withdraw all of his money from the bank and then report the credit cards as stolen. Daniel Wozniak claims he dropped Sam Herr off at a local mall. Detectives remained skeptical, however, believing that Daniel Wozniak was still protecting Sam Herr and had more to do with Julie Kibushi's murder than he had let on. In an effort to uncover the truth, police asked Wozniak to provide a DNA sample, a request that made him nervous. Detectives noticed Daniel Wozniak's nervous behavior when questioned about his DNA being found at Sam Herr's apartment, despite his attempts to act nonchalant. As the pressure mounted, he began to alter his story repeatedly. Eventually, Daniel Wozniak cracked and admitted he knew about Julie Kibushi's murder and had helped the perpetrator escape. However, when reminded that his DNA had been collected, he insisted it would not match any evidence found on Julie Kibushi's body, clinging to the claim of his innocence. Just as detectives were expecting Daniel Wozniak to reveal more information, he abruptly ended the interview. The detectives, determined to uncover the truth, informed Daniel Wozniak that he would be arrested as an accessory to murder if he didn't provide a full account of his involvement. Daniel Wozniak, who was scheduled to get married in just 48 hours, was caught between revealing the truth and avoiding arrest, which would ruin his wedding plans. Under intense questioning, Daniel Wozniak's story began to unravel. Detectives sensed his weakness and accelerated the process by falsely claiming that DNA evidence linked him to Julie Kibushi's body. They misled him, as DNA test results would not be available for weeks. Instead of disputing the claim, Daniel Wozniak surprisingly explained that his DNA would be on Julie Kibushi's body because he was near her. This inconsistent response raised suspicions. As Daniel Wozniak's lies continued to crumble, he made a stunning revelation, which was particularly alarming to detectives because they had initially observed only one gunshot wound at the crime scene. It wasn't until the autopsy was performed that a second gunshot wound was discovered, casting further doubt on Daniel Wozniak's credibility. Daniel Wozniak's confession implicated him as an accomplice to the murder, allowing investigators to formally detain him. However, detectives still needed to locate Sam Herr, and Daniel Wozniak refused to cooperate. Despite being in custody, Daniel Wozniak made a phone call to his fiancée, Rachel Buffett. Unbeknownst to Daniel Wozniak, the conversation was being recorded, which would eventually ensnare him in his own deceit. Rachel decided to prioritize her freedom over her relationship and informed Daniel Wozniak that she would share more information with the detectives. Realizing he needed to act swiftly, Daniel Wozniak became frantic and sought to negotiate a deal with the detectives, a reversal of his stance just hours earlier. Daniel Wozniak revealed a shocking account to the detectives, detailing his sinister murder plan. It began with a seemingly innocuous request to a friend, Sam Herr, whom he considered trustworthy. On May 21, 2010, Daniel Wozniak asked Sam Herr to help him move boxes at the Los Alamitos Theater attic, located on a local military base. Sam Herr was initially unaware of what had happened. When he realized he had been shot, he begged Daniel Wozniak for help. However, Daniel Wozniak showed no mercy. Without hesitation, he reloaded the gun and shot Sam Herr a second time, killing him instantly. The suspect brutally murdered Sam Herr and didn't stop there. He then used Sam Herr's phone to text Julie Kibushi, luring her to Sam Herr's apartment. He left Sam Herr's body in the attic later that night. The suspect snuck into Sam Herr's apartment, where Julie Kibushi had fallen into his trap. He then shot Julie Kibushi twice in the head. Daniel Wozniak altered the crime scene to make people think Sam Herr was the culprit, and he fled after attacking and killing Julie Kibushi. However, Daniel Wozniak realized that he still had to hide Sam Herr's body. Daniel Wozniak went back to the attic and cut off Sam Hare's hands and head to make it harder to identify the body. He then got rid of these body parts in a nearby park. Despite his gruesome actions, Daniel Wozniak appeared to be unaffected and returned to the theater, where he was seen laughing and joking with others in several photos taken at cast parties, which were later found by detectives. The underlying motive for the murders was surprisingly straightforward: money. Daniel Wozniak's financial struggles were well documented, with 2 months of unpaid rent threatening his eviction and no means to fund the lavish wedding and honeymoon he had planned. However, his situation changed dramatically when he discovered that Sam Hare had $62,000 in savings from his military service. This revelation sparked a sinister plan, and Daniel Wozniak brutally murdered 2 innocent people in cold blood, all to fund his own extravagant celebrations. The bag containing crucial evidence against Daniel Wozniak was meant to be disposed of by his brother Tim, but Tim threw it over their parents' fence instead. The bag held incriminating items like bloody clothing, a weapon, and victim Sam Hare's records and passport, all with Daniel's DNA. This treasure trove of evidence helped secure a quick conviction, with Daniel found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder on December 16, 2015. On January 11, 2016, the jury in Daniel Wozniak's trial recommended the death penalty after only 1 hour of deliberation, a remarkably short time for such a serious decision. The judge later sentenced Daniel Wozniak to death on September 23, 2016. Years after the trial, detectives discovered that Rachel Buffett, Daniel Wozniak's former fiancée, had been aware of the murder plots and had misled investigators. Despite her denials, Rachel Buffett was arrested and charged with 3 felony counts of accessory after the fact for allegedly lying to the police on multiple occasions. On September 12, 2018, Rachel Buffett was found guilty of 2 serious charges, which carried a maximum sentence of 44 months in prison. As a result, she received a 32-month prison sentence on November 8, 2018. She was eventually released in 2019. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Anderson. Amanda Anderson was born on October 10, 1990, in Fridley, Minnesota, to Mark and Stacy Kennedy Anderson. Amanda grew up to be an aspiring writer with a passion for words, music, and life. She graduated with honors from the Tyler Gospel Chapel School in 2009 and worked at Trinity Mother Frances while attending Tyler Junior College, where she majored in English literature. On September 15, 2010, 15-year-old Nate Anderson found his sister Amanda dead on the floor with multiple bullet holes in her head after returning from a jog. He had gone out to clear his head while doing homework, but became stressed and returned to find the door kicked open. Nate immediately called 911, describing the scene without touching anything. When investigators arrived, Nate recounted the events, still shaken. The investigation revealed that Amanda was shot while sitting on her bed, causing her to fall to the floor. The killer removed shell casings, suggesting a revolver was used. Amanda's death was devastating to her parents, who were deeply religious and couldn't comprehend who would commit such a heinous act. Their daughter had just graduated from high school and was trying to find her way in life. She had no enemies and wished no one harm. The investigators canvassed the neighborhood where the crime took place, speaking with residents to gather information about Amanda and her family. Uniformly, the people they interviewed described the Andersons as a tight-knit, religious family. One neighbor offered a possible theory about Amanda's fate. He pointed out that the area was previously crime-free, but 2 weeks before Amanda's death, a house in the neighborhood was robbed. It's possible that the same person was involved in Amanda's murder. The neighbor suggested that the perpetrator might have seen Amanda's brother, Nate, go for a run, then broken into their house. If Amanda witnessed the break-in, the robber might have shot her to silence her. To explore this theory, the investigators needed evidence to determine whether a botched robbery led to Amanda's death. Typically, burglars who are caught by homeowners will go to great lengths to prevent them from calling the police. However, in this case, nothing was taken from the Anderson home, and Amanda's room was left undisturbed. Amanda's home was burgled, but the thief didn't take anything valuable, including jewelry and a laptop. Amanda's father, Mark, checked the house and confirmed that nothing was missing. This led the investigators to question whether the break-in was actually a robbery gone wrong. The forensic team searched Amanda's room and the entire house for evidence, collecting fingerprints and hair samples that didn't belong to Amanda or her family. They also took the clothes Nate wore when he found Amanda's body, even though they didn't have any visible bloodstains. This was consistent with Nate's 911 call, in which he said he hadn't touched anything. The police still sent the clothes to the lab for further analysis, along with other evidence. To begin their investigation, the police first had to rule out Amanda's family members as potential suspects. They asked her father, Mark Anderson, to show them all the weapons in their house, which was a common practice in Texas. Although the Andersons weren't avid hunters, they did occasionally practice shooting. Following Mark's directions, the police found and seized over 10 different types of pistols, rifles, and revolvers from the house. With no clear motives or suspects, the police explored the possibility of criminal gang involvement, but they quickly dismissed it. Their informants also didn't provide any useful information. 2 days after her death, on September 17, 2010, the police received the autopsy report, which revealed that Amanda had been shot 4 times in the head. What was especially puzzling was that every shot would have been fatal, yet the perpetrator had continued to pull the trigger 3 more times. The unusual location and direction of the bullet wounds on Amanda's head raised suspicions. The attacker used a small-caliber pistol, firing from a distance of at least a yard away, as there were no gunpowder marks around the wounds. 2 wounds were located on top of her head, one near the right temple and one on her forehead, with all shots entering from top to bottom, except for one shot to the right temple that entered at a right angle. This suggested a deliberate and controlled attack, more like an execution. Forensic analysis led investigators to believe that Amanda knew her killer. They based this conclusion on 2 key facts. Firstly, Amanda was sitting on her bed, occupied with her laptop, when she was shot, indicating that she felt comfortable and safe in the presence of the attacker. Secondly, the fact that the attacker was standing next to her suggests a level of familiarity and intimacy. If Amanda had not known the person, she would likely have reacted or taken action when they entered her room, but she did not, implying that she trusted the perpetrator and did not anticipate the attack. Detectives investigating Amanda's death questioned her college friends, learning she was cautious and avoided strangers, drugs, and criminals. Her best friend confirmed she had no enemies on campus. Despite this, they considered that someone might have secretly targeted her. Reviewing college security footage and reports from the past year, they searched for suspicious incidents but found nothing useful. The police revisited the Anderson family to inquire about Amanda's personal life, suspecting a personal motive behind the brutal crime due to the multiple wounds. Amanda's mother was baffled by the incident, describing her daughter as a kind and diligent student who regularly attended church. Although Amanda didn't have a boyfriend at the time of her death, her mother revealed that she had met someone about a year prior, but their relationship ended. The police sought out this individual to learn more about his connection with Amanda and the reasons behind their breakup. Upon questioning, the man revealed that he and Amanda shared some classes and occasionally went to the movies with friends, but they never developed a romantic relationship. They had gone out together a few times, but it didn't progress further. When asked about the last time he saw Amanda, he stated that it was the day before her murder. The police started their investigation again from the beginning, re-examining all the evidence. They focused on Nate's 911 call, which was the starting point of the case. During the call, Nate claimed he didn't enter his sister's room and that someone had shot Amanda. The investigators realized it was impossible for someone standing in the doorway to know Amanda was shot in the head or how many times without entering the room. The police revisited the Anderson house and inspected the door, which Nate said was opened when he got home. Although there were scratches on the door, the lock was intact, leading the police to believe someone was trying to make it look like the door was kicked in. The crime lab analyzed the weapons found in the Anderson house and concluded that one of the pistols was likely the weapon used to shoot Amanda. After a thorough investigation, detectives reached a conclusion. All evidence pointed to a family member as Amanda's killer. The murder weapon, a pistol, was hidden in a secure location, suggesting the killer knew exactly where to find it. Moreover, the killer returned the gun to its hiding place after the crime. On the night of the murder, Amanda's parents had solid alibis. Her father was dining with a friend, and her mother was at work. This left only Amanda and her 15-year-old brother Nate in the house. To find answers, investigators delved deeper into the events of that evening. It turned out that Amanda's father, Mark, had called her to remind her to pick up her mother from work. 12 minutes later, Mark received a call from Nate, who was crying and claimed someone had shot Amanda. However, this call raised a disturbing question. Why did Nate call his father before calling emergency services, unless he was trying to cover his tracks after murdering his own sister? The police required solid proof before making any accusations, as they didn't want to cause further distress to Amanda and Nate's parents. To gather more information, the investigators decided to question Mark Anderson, Nate's father, without directly accusing his son of involvement. During the conversation, Nate's parents became aware that the police suspected their son. When asked about Nate's recent use of the .22 caliber pistol, Mark revealed that he had given the gun to Nate a few days before Amanda's death, and that Nate had fired it in their backyard. The officers went back to the Anderson house and found .22 caliber casings in the backyard that matched the bullets found in Amanda's body. While this was suspicious, it wasn't conclusive evidence. However, 2 weeks later, a crucial clue was found. Nate's clothes, which he wore when he claimed to have found his sister dead, were tested with luminol, revealing traces of blood. Further analysis by a national blood spatter expert suggested that Nate was either in the room when the shooting occurred or was the one who fired the fatal shots. The tests confirmed that his clothes had Amanda's blood on them. Despite this, the Anderson siblings seemed to have a loving relationship. Photos showed them being affectionate, and their parents described them as best friends who often made videos together, including one just days before Amanda's death. The police were left wondering what could have driven Nate to commit such a heinous act. On November 10, 2010, police arrested Nate Anderson at a church, suspecting him of murdering his own sister. The accusation shocked everyone who knew him, as it seemed out of character. The trial began on October 24, 2011, and was an emotionally challenge for the Anderson family. Despite the evidence presented against Nate, his family remains supportive and refuses to believe he is capable of such a crime. According to his grandmother, Dolores Anderson, Nate is a kind and innocent boy who would never harm his sister. His parents, too, are adamant that he is not responsible for Amanda's death. For his mother, Stacy Anderson, the whole ordeal has been a nightmare. She is still adjusting to the loss of her daughter and now has to cope with her son's arrest. Mark expressed his outrage and disbelief at the accusation that his son killed his sister Amanda. The brutality of the crime, including the fact that Amanda was shot 4 times, has led Mark to conclude that Nate could not have committed the crime. Initially, Mark had some doubts about Nate's involvement, but once he learned about the 4 gunshots, he became convinced of his son's innocence. Mark is critical of the authorities, accusing them of ignoring evidence that exonerates Nate. and instead focusing on evidence that supports their own case. He feels that they have already made up their minds about Nate's guilt, despite the fact that an expert had recommended that Nate be tried in juvenile court, not adult court. After Amanda's death, investigators found evidence in the Anderson home that shed light on the case. Prosecutors discovered that Nate's computer had a history of visits to adult websites and violent drawings. Furthermore, a text message on Amanda's phone mentioned someone should be shot, but the context indicated it was a joke about Nate not helping with chores and playfully shooting staples at Amanda. An expert testified that this evidence could be a motive for the crime. However, Nate's attorney argued that the evidence was not unusual or incriminating. Ultimately, Nate accepted a plea deal in February 2012 and pleaded guilty to a first-degree crime. He confessed to a psychologist and his parents that he had killed Amanda. In a statement, Nate and Amanda's parents shared Nate's confession. According to Mark Anderson, Nate told him that he shot Amanda with a pistol found in their home and asked for forgiveness, which he granted. Stacy, the mother, expressed the immense difficulty she experienced as a mother who loves both her children. Nate Anderson has been sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. His attorney believes that agreeing to the plea deal was in Nate's best interest, as neither Nate nor his family wanted the case to go to trial. Regarding the motive behind the crime, Nate's attorneys declined to provide details, saying only that they know what happened and are choosing not to discuss it further. However, they did reveal that Nate has shown remorse for his actions, has asked for forgiveness, and has received it. The attorneys described the process of coming to terms with what happened as difficult and emotional. The authorities have determined that the incident was a hate crime, as there was no evidence of any other trauma. According to the Smith County Sheriff's Office, Nate will be eligible to apply for parole in 2 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Cassie Farrington. Born on December 22, 1990 in Virginia, Cassie Marie Brooks was the second oldest of 4 children to Chuck and Darlene Brooks. She excelled in school, became a member of the National Honor Society, participated in sports, and aspired to become a doctor. However, everything changed when she got pregnant at 16. She had to adjust her plans, and in 1 month, she graduated from high school, gave birth, married Bradley Farrington, and moved out of her parents' house. Years later, Cassie had a second child, but her marriage began to deteriorate. At 22, she got divorced. With her 2 children, she lived in Silver City, a town where she worked as a nurse at a local hospital and rented a place from a coworker. By the time Cassie turned 23, she had entered a new romantic relationship with a man named David Barry. He quickly formed a strong bond with her 2 children, which brought her great joy. Cassie and David took their time building a life together, and she was thrilled to report to her family and colleagues that he brought happiness and stability to both her and the kids. On March 24, 2014, Cassie phoned her parents after finishing her night shift at Silver City Hospital. During their conversation, she outlined her plan for the morning, driving home, picking up the kids, taking them to school, and then returning home to rest for a few hours before picking them up again later that day. Cassie was supposed to pick up her kids from school, but she didn't show up even after their classes had finished. School staff tried to reach her, but couldn't, so they called her parents. Her mother, Darlene, tried to call her too, but there was no answer. Darlene thought maybe Cassie had just overslept after working a night shift, so she asked Sherelle, Cassie's landlord, to check on her. Sherelle went to the house, knocked on the door, and called out Cassie's name, but got no response. She then went around to the back door, looked through the window, and saw water pouring out of the bathroom into the kitchen. Sherelle knocked on the door again, louder this time, and shouted Cassie's name, still with no response. She used her own key to unlock the door and entered the house, where she heard the sound of running water getting louder. As she walked through the wet kitchen towards the bathroom, she continued to call out Cassie's name, her voice starting to shake. When she finally saw Cassie, her worst fears were confirmed. Cassie's body lay face down in the overflowing bathtub, water still pouring out. Cherelle found her and pulled her out of the water, placing her on the floor. Unfortunately, it was too late to try CPR, her body indicating Cassie had been dead for several hours. Cherelle quickly called 911 to report the situation, and paramedics and police were dispatched to the house. She also had the difficult task of informing Cassie's parents of their daughter's passing. While waiting for help to arrive, Cherelle searched the house and discovered another bathtub, also overflowing with running water, suggesting a possible accident or intentional act. The tub had a feature to prevent overflow, so the extra water flowed into the drain instead of spilling onto the floor. Cherelle noticed that the towel rack, which was previously mounted on the wall, was now lying on the floor, having been torn off. Meanwhile, Chuck and Darlene, who lived in Arizona, immediately dropped everything and traveled to Silver City after receiving the news. A couple of hours after receiving the devastating news, Cassie's parents arrived at the house where her body had been found. The police were already on the scene, and they noticed that there was no evidence of break-in. The doors and windows were locked, and the glass was intact. Additionally, valuable items that might have attracted a thief were left untouched. The police chief's first question to Cassie's parents was whether their daughter had been suicidal or had any reason to take her own life. Cassie's parents, Chuck and Darlene, were adamant that their daughter would never do such a thing, especially not with young children depending on her. Despite their protestations, the police chief repeated his suggestion that Cassie's death was likely a deliberate act. The police investigation was remarkably brief, lasting only a few hours, which struck Cassie's parents as unusual. Typically, the police take days to thoroughly examine the scene of a tragedy. In this case, they seemed eager to wrap things up quickly, even telling Cherelle that she could reuse the house soon. This hasty approach only added to Cassie's parents' growing unease, prompting them to decide to investigate the house themselves. When Cassie's parents drained the bathtub, they were surprised to find water still in it. They also discovered a series of black streaks on the tub's sides, similar to the marks left by rubber-soled shoes on the floor in various areas. Additionally, they found Cassie's glasses, hairband, and a coat hanger. Given these discoveries and the lack of fingerprint evidence collected by the police, Chuck and Darlene suspected that the authorities might be trying to quickly close Cassie's case as non-criminal. However, a call to the district attorney's office prompted the police to appear more diligent in their investigation. The medical examiner's report ultimately prevented the case from being closed. It revealed that Cassie's body had multiple bruises, including those on her neck. The forensic medical examiner concluded that her death was a homicide caused by an unspecified mechanism of injury. Unfortunately, the crime scene was no longer of significant use due to the property owner's subsequent cleanup and renovations. As a result, the police were unable to uncover new leads, leaving Cassie's parents with no updates on the case for months. David Barry, who had been in contact with Cassie before her death, was quickly cleared as a suspect due to his solid alibi. As time went on, Cassie's parents, Chuck and Darlene, grew increasingly frustrated with the local police, feeling they were not doing enough to investigate their daughter's death. After meeting with the chief district attorney, Chuck and Darlene requested that action be taken against Detective Jose Sanchez, who was handling the case. The district attorney reviewed the case file and agreed that Sanchez had made several mistakes. As a result, Sanchez was removed from the case and a more experienced detective was assigned. The new detective focused on the person Cassie's family and close friends had suspected from the start, her ex-husband, Bradley Farrington. Cassie and Bradley were in a bitter dispute over their children's custody at the time of her death. Given the court's likely ruling, it's probable that the children would have remained with their mother. Bradley stood to gain the most from Cassie's death, as it would grant him custody of the children and release him from his child support obligations. Bradley Farrington became a suspect in Cassie's death investigation. Having quit the force just months prior, Bradley had a motive for the crime. Moreover, his law enforcement background gave him the necessary expertise to manipulate the investigation and conceal evidence. Unfortunately, the bathwater had erased any potential DNA evidence and destroyed the shoe prints on the floor. Any incriminating evidence that may have linked Bradley Farrington to the crime scene was irreparably lost due to the incompetence of the local police. The only remaining option to hold Bradley accountable was through eyewitness accounts. Cassie told her parents that Bradley had often been abusive to her and the children, and that he had even mocked her, suggesting she try to report him to the police. As a Silver City police officer at the time, he felt invincible and above the law. It's heartbreaking to imagine Cassie's desperation, knowing she couldn't seek help from the police because her abusive husband's friends were part of the force. At her workplace, she confided in coworkers about Bradley's threats, including his chilling warning that he would make her disappear and no one would ever know. But in the end, 19 months later, on October 23, 2015, Bradley Farrington was arrested and charged in connection with her death. Bradley stood trial for Cassie's murder. At the trial, the prosecution presented multiple witnesses, including Cassie's parents, friends, and coworkers, who all testified about the abuse Cassie had suffered at the hands of her police officer husband. Additionally, Dr. Michael Hunter, a leading forensic expert from San Francisco, testified, assessing the conclusions drawn by local experts. Hunter, an experienced professional with over 20 years in his field, presented autopsy photographs to the jury and concluded that Cassie's neck injuries suggested she was likely strangled to death. Former Detective Sanchez, who initially handled the case before retiring, was subpoenaed to testify in court. He stated that he never considered Bradley Farrington a suspect during the initial investigation, as there was no evidence to warrant it. Sanchez also revealed that no fingerprints were collected from the crime scene. Sanchez expressed his suspicion that the crime scene had been intentionally cleaned up after the fact, which would explain why no fingerprints were found. After deliberating for 4.5 hours, the jury found Bradley Farrington guilty on September 7, 2018, and sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 30 years. In 2020, Farrington appealed his conviction to the New Mexico Supreme Court. He argued that the trial court had improperly allowed friends, family members, and co-workers of the victim to testify about statements Cassie made regarding his threats and acts of domestic violence. The state's highest court has upheld Bradley's conviction, ruling that there was sufficient evidence to support it. The court also rejected Bradley's appeal against the hearsay testimony that was allowed during his trial. Bradley is currently serving his sentence in prison. His children are now in the care of his parents, who are restricting their contact with the family of the victim. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Danielle Jennings. Danielle Jennings was born on September 16, 1978, in Columbia, South Carolina, USA. She spent her childhood in Stockton, Georgia, with her mother and stepfather. Despite her cheerful and outgoing personality, Danielle faced a challenging situation when she became pregnant at the age of 16. However, she was determined to be a good mother and had no doubts about having her child. After the breakup with Carl, the father of her child, Danielle gave birth to her son, Tristan, in 1996. At just 17 years old, she became a single mother. Despite the challenges, Danielle was determined to provide the best life for herself and her son. She eventually met Luis, a man who would become a father figure to Tristan. Danielle and Luis had known each other since they were teenagers and had been friends in the past. When they started dating, Danielle was happy to have found someone who could support her and her son. Luis took care of Danielle and Tristan and she felt like her life was finally falling into place. They moved in together, and Danielle found a job at a landscaping company. She was proud of herself for taking this step and was glad to have found a sense of stability and security. In December 1998, Luis proposed to Danielle, and she happily accepted. At the time, Danielle's life was on the upswing. She had a wonderful son, was engaged to the man she loved, and had promising career prospects. However, her life was about to take a devastating turn. On March 15, 1999, Luis came home from work to find Danielle lifeless on their bed. Their son, Tristan, was at daycare that day. Luis immediately knew something was wrong based on the color of Danielle's skin. He called 911, and police arrived at their apartment in Norcross, Georgia. The initial information was that a woman had died and her fiancé had made the 911 call. This raised suspicions among investigators, as it is not uncommon for the partner to be involved in the death of their loved one. Luis reported the crime to the police at the apartment entrance, stating that the victim was 20-year-old Danielle Jennings. According to Luis, he found Danielle's body when he returned from work. She was lying face down on the bed, and when he turned her over, he discovered that she was dead. Luis immediately called 911. The police took Luis to the station for questioning, and investigators examined the crime scene. Danielle was lying on her back on the bed, fully dressed, with a ligature around her neck. The ligature was a stocking tied very tightly, indicating that the perpetrator left her no chance of survival. The stocking was tied at the back of Danielle's neck, suggesting that the perpetrator was behind her when she was strangled. The bed was disheveled, and one of the dresser drawers was open, possibly indicating that the perpetrator took the stocking from her drawer. Additionally, Danielle's purse had been rummaged through, with its contents dumped out. The police considered the possibility that the crime was a robbery that escalated into murder, but noted that valuable items such as cameras and jewelry remained untouched. The investigators considered the possibility that the perpetrator's goal was to steal from the apartment, but after encountering Danielle, decided to kill her to eliminate her as a witness. They also explored the possibility that the crime scene was staged, as the front door showed no signs of forced entry. After searching the surrounding area, they found no evidence. The sliding glass door leading to the backyard was locked and showed no signs of forced entry. Based on their findings, the investigators concluded that Danielle must have let the perpetrator involuntarily, or that the perpetrator had a key to the apartment. This led them to focus on Luis, Danielle's fiancé, as the main suspect during their questioning. Luis was very emotional about the situation, as romantic relationships can sometimes lead to intense anger and sad consequences. The interrogation began with questions about his whereabouts on the day of his fiancé's death. According to Luis, he spent the entire day at work, and the last time he saw Danielle was Danielle was when he left for work in the morning. They both left the apartment at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle returned to get something. Luis claimed that Danielle was worried about an important meeting with management that day and seemed a little distracted. He also mentioned that Danielle called him at 11:30 a.m. to ask if he wanted to go to lunch with her, but he refused because he had a lot of work to do. Luis tried to contact Danielle later that day, but she wasn't answering. He called her colleagues and learned that she had gone out for lunch but never returned. When he tried to call their home phone, Danielle didn't answer. This led him to leave work and check on her. When he arrived at their apartment, he noticed that the front door was unlocked, and he found a jar that made him nervous. During the investigation, Luis stated that they had a good relationship and were deeply in love. Luis expressed that he was depressed and felt that the police were wasting their time by interrogating him, as he believed the real culprit was still at large. Detectives interviewed Danielle's friends and family, who all confirmed that Luis could not harm Danielle, as they were planning a wedding and were in love. Luis's co-workers also confirmed that he was at work all day. which ruled out any possibility of his involvement in the crime. Luis mentioned that Danielle had been receiving excessive attention from her coworker, Jeff, who made her uncomfortable. Investigators went to Danielle's workplace and spoke to her boss, who confirmed that Danielle had complained about Jeff's behavior. Jeff's behavior was making Danielle uncomfortable. He was touching her and interfering with her work. Danielle had made it clear that she was in a committed relationship with Luis. Despite this, Jeff continued to make Danielle feel uncomfortable. The situation was also complicated by the fact that Jeff was 40 years old, while Danielle was just 20. Danielle's co-workers reported that she left the office for lunch, but never returned, providing investigators with a timeline for when the attack occurred. This raised suspicions about Jeff, who was absent from the office during the same time frame. The investigation explored the possibility that Jeff may have attacked Danielle after she opened the front door to her home. This could explain why there were no signs of forced entry. Jeff was brought in for questioning to discuss his relationship with Danielle. During the questioning, Jeff acknowledged inviting Danielle to lunch, but denied any involvement in Danielle's death. He did admit to liking Danielle, but stated that he didn't engage in any inappropriate behavior that would justify her complaint against him. Jeff claimed that he couldn't have attacked Danielle because he had an alibi. According to Jeff, he was with another colleague all day, working on various issues and driving around the city together. This meant that it was impossible for him to have committed the crime. Jeff identified a co-worker who he claimed was with him at the time of the crime. Investigators met with this co-worker, who confirmed Jeff's alibi, thus ruling out Jeff from suspect. The autopsy report provided some insight into the circumstances of Danielle's death. The cause of death was asphyxia, indicating that Danielle was attacked by surprise. Investigators concluded that the perpetrator approached her from behind and tightened the stocking until she lost consciousness. The perpetrator then tied the stocking in a knot to prevent Danielle from regaining consciousness. The lack of defensive injuries on her body suggested that Danielle did not resist the attack. In fact, the only injury on her body was the ligature mark on her neck, indicating that she may not have even seen the face of her attacker. The police investigation at the crime scene did not yield any evidence that could help identify the perpetrator. Despite a thorough search, no shoe prints, DNA, fingerprints, or hair were found. As a result, there was no evidence to send to the laboratory for analysis. Without any new leads, the police returned to their initial theory that the crime was a robbery gone wrong. The police asked Luis to re-examine the apartment with them to see if he could notice anything unusual. After a thorough examination, Luis reported that nothing seemed to be missing from the apartment and all items were in their usual places. However, a few days later, Luis contacted the police to report that he could not find Danielle's wedding ring. Luis also pointed out another unusual detail to the investigators. The stocking used to strangle Danielle did not belong to her. According to Luis, Danielle did not wear stockings, which suggested that the perpetrator had brought the stocking with them. One of her friends mentioned her ex-boyfriend Eddie, whom she started dating while pregnant. Eddie was known for his violent behavior, and as the relationship progressed, he became increasingly controlling and domineering. He eventually forbade her to see her friends and family. The relationship with Eddie continued to deteriorate after Danielle gave birth to her son. Things took a turn for the worse when Eddie started using illegal substances, and Danielle decided to end the relationship. Danielle attempted to start anew after leaving Eddie, but he refused to accept the end of their relationship. His behavior became increasingly unpredictable, prompting Danielle to obtain a restraining order against him. However, Eddie repeatedly disregarded the order. Eddie's actions escalated, with him frequently calling Danielle, parking near her home, and even appearing at her workplace. Danielle's family reported that Eddie had made numerous calls to her in the months leading up to her death, demanding that she meet with him, but she consistently hung up on him. Detectives identified Eddie as a prime suspect and brought him in for questioning. He was hostile and resistant to cooperating with the police. When discussing Danielle, his demeanor became visibly agitated. During the interrogation, Eddie's account of his relationship with Danielle contradicted the statements made by her family members. He claimed to have never been violent towards her and denied any involvement in her death, stating that he had not spoken to her in over a year. The investigators suspected that Eddie was lying to them. To verify his alibi, they checked Danielle's phone call history and discovered that Eddie had been in contact with her in the months leading up to her death. The police needed to confirm Eddie's whereabouts at the time of the attack. Eddie claimed to have been working out of state as a tow truck driver at the time of Danielle's death. He stated that he was miles away from the Ashley Lakes apartments where Danielle lived. His employer corroborated Eddie's story, providing receipts from a motel and gas stations that suggested Eddie was indeed out of state. However, 3 days after Danielle's death, the police received a new lead that changed the direction of the investigation. During an interview with residents of Ashley Lakes apartments, a woman shared a disturbing incident that had occurred a week before Danielle's death. She reported that she had been awoken by a knock on her door, but when she looked through the peephole, no one was there. She returned to bed, but a minute later, she heard her front door slam shut. She reported an incident where a maintenance man entered her apartment without permission. She stated that he was looking at her rather than performing his job, which made her feel uncomfortable. This incident led to an investigation, and the woman provided a description of the man to the police. Further investigation revealed that another woman had reported a similar incident, where a man entered her apartment claiming to need to change light bulbs, despite her apartment not needing any new bulbs. The man made a statement suggesting that he might be in the wrong apartment and then left. The management of Ashley Lakes apartments provided investigators with a list of maintenance specialists working at the complex, and only one matched the description given by the two women. This individual was identified as Calvin Oliver, a 42-year-old maintenance worker who started working at the complex in September 1998. When shown his photo, both women identified Oliver as the man who entered their apartments without permission. The investigation also revealed that Oliver had been working at the complex when a string of incidents involving stolen items occurred, including missing cash, checks, jewelry, and computers. As the investigation continued, detectives searched for potential connections between Calvin Oliver and Danielle Jennings. They discovered that Oliver had performed work in Jennings' apartment just a couple of weeks before her death. This revelation made Oliver a key person of interest in the investigation. Oliver likely knew that Danielle and her fiancé Luis would be at work during the day, allowing him to enter their apartment without raising suspicion using his master key. It's possible that Danielle returned home for lunch while Oliver was already inside. Calvin Oliver was brought in for questioning by investigators. Initially, they asked him about the thefts that some Ashley Lakes apartments residents had reported. He denied any involvement. When questioned about Danielle Jennings, Oliver claimed he had heard about what happened to her but didn't know her personally. He admitted to doing work in her apartment, but the police lacked concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Just before releasing Oliver from the police station, investigators decided to run a database check on him. The results were shocking. Oliver had an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear on a burglary charge related to the theft of personal checks. Oliver had a significant criminal history, with convictions dating back to 1974, including residential burglaries, armed robbery, and sexual assault. He spent most of his life in prison, which raises the question of how he was able to get a job at Ashley Lakes apartments. This is relevant because if Oliver was in Danielle's apartment when she came in, he had a motive to hurt her to avoid going back to prison. The police detained Oliver due to an active warrant for his arrest, which gave them time to investigate his involvement in Danielle's death. As part of their investigation into the thefts at Ashley Lake's apartments, the police obtained a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. There, they found stolen belongings from other residents, as well as Danielle's wedding ring, which linked Oliver to her death. 9 days after Danielle's death, Calvin Oliver was charged with first-degree felony and burglary. After his false statement was exposed, Oliver refused to answer any more questions and chose to remain silent. During the trial, the prosecution presented a different scenario. Oliver killed Danielle after she caught him stealing at her apartment on March 14th, as she unexpectedly returned home from work. The trial lasted 5 days, and the jury delivered a guilty verdict on October 13, 2000. The court sentenced Oliver to life in prison for the murder of Danielle Jennings and an additional 20 years for stealing her wedding ring. As a result, Danielle's mother and stepfather, Sherry and Philip Jennings, gained custody of her son, Tristan. Ashley Lake's Apartments was aware of Oliver's troubled past, but failed to conduct a background check on him. This lack of oversight allowed Oliver, who had spent most of his life in prison, to reside in the same apartment complex as Danielle. Danielle's family sued Ashley Lake's Apartments after a series of thefts, and the murder went unreported by management. They claimed negligent hiring, inadequate security, and death. The jury returned a verdict of over $13 million, plus $2.5 million in punitive damages initially, later reduced to $250,000. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nicole Loeb. On August 19, 2014, at 5 p.m., the Portland Emergency Services received a distress call from a man reporting a woman stabbed in the chest at the Timber Creek Apartments. The victim, who was still alive but struggling to breathe, needed immediate medical attention. The eyewitness requested an ambulance be sent to the scene as soon as possible. When paramedics arrived, they found the victim. Despite the paramedics' best efforts, she succumbed to her injuries. Before passing away, she shared crucial information. The man who made the 911 call explained that he and his wife were walking down the stairs towards the parking lot when they heard a scream. He looked to his right and saw a woman running towards them, crying out, "He stabbed me! He stabbed me!" The victim told them that she didn't know her attacker, but described him as wearing camouflage pants and a black hoodie. The manager of the Timber Creek Apartments identified the victim as 29-year-old Nicole Loeb, a leasing consultant who had been working at the complex for a few weeks. On August 19th, Nicole was driving a golf cart to deliver lease renewal letters to residents, along with a balloon and a popcorn package. She marked each apartment on a map as she made the deliveries. The investigation revealed that the attack likely occurred in a specific stairwell at Timber Creek, known as Breezeway. This conclusion was based on Nicole's notations and the map she had marked. It is believed that the attacker was waiting for her under the stairs, as several indicators pointed to this location, including a trail of blood drops and scattered leaflets at the foot of the stairs. During the investigation, several witnesses reported seeing a suspicious young male wearing a black hoodie and cam pants in the area around the time of the attack. By combining the reports and timelines of each sighting, detectives were able to piece together the path the suspect took into and out of Timber Creek. The Washington County Search and Rescue Team searched the woods along Cedar Mill Creek, which runs through the Timber Creek apartment complex. They found several items during their search and sent them to a laboratory to see if they were relevant to the case. The police contacted Chris Loeb, Nicole's husband, to inform him of the incident. Chris and Nicole had a blended family, including 2 daughters from his previous relationships and a son together. Nicole was a strong and resilient person who had overcome cancer as a teenager. She developed a passion for fitness and bodybuilding and competed in several events. Her dream was to become a coach and help others achieve their fitness goals. The attack on Nicole was not a robbery, and Tinoco did not attempt to remove any of her clothing. This suggests that the motive behind the attack may have been personal. As a result, detectives began to focus their attention on her husband, Chris. Nicole was a beautiful woman, a loving wife, an amazing mother, and a devoted friend. She was unafraid to share her faith and opinions with others, and her goal was to make the world a better place. Her legacy lives on, and it's clear that she achieved her goal. She touched the lives of everyone in the room in ways that will have a lasting impact. The police interviewed residents of the Timber Creek apartments and found 2 witnesses who saw a man in a black hoodie and cam pants matching the suspect's description running across the road during the time of the attack. The witnesses saw the man running towards the houses across the street from the Timber Creek apartments, not looking around, and with a hood over his head. Using the witnesses' descriptions, detectives created a sketch of the suspect and quickly distributed it throughout the city. A sketch of the suspect was shown on TV. Detectives also worked with informants, gathering several potential leads, including one from a man whose son knew someone named Taylor. According to the man who reported Taylor, he had been threatening people with a knife in recent weeks. The police located Taylor and brought him in for questioning. During the questioning, investigators found his statements unusual and suspected he might be suffering from a mental illness. When asked about Nicole Laub, he openly admitted to taking her life. However, Taylor's confession was inconsistent, repeating information from the news and inventing unrelated details. As a result, police excluded him from their list of suspects. Another potential lead emerged involving a man named Nick, who had a history of crime. Nick had some physical characteristics similar to the suspect in the sketch, but his past behavior didn't suggest he was capable of a crime like the one committed against Nicole. Despite having a history of run-ins with the law, Nick had never been known to physically harm anyone. When police brought Nick in for questioning, he denied any involvement in the crime and requested a lawyer. The police then obtained a search warrant for Nick's home, where they found a black hoodie and camouflage pants. However, the hoodie didn't match the witness's description because it had a prominent white logo on the front. The police sent the clothes to a lab for further analysis, but experts found no evidence linking them to the crime. The police obtained Nick's mobile phone records, which provided conclusive evidence that he was not at the crime scene when Nicole was attacked. This eliminated Nick as a suspect, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 3 weeks after Nicole's death, on September 13, 2014, the Eugene Police Department received a call came from Eugene, the second-largest city in Oregon. On the night of the 13th, Heather Miller, a 39-year-old woman, was attacked as she was leaving a bar near Autzen Stadium after watching a game. Tinoco, identified as Jamie Tinoco, was publicly named by the police, who released his photo in the hopes that other victims would come forward. Detectives investigating the death of Nicole Laub noticed a resemblance between Tinoco's photo and their suspect sketch. Further investigation revealed that Tinoco lived with his parents in an apartment directly across from the Timber Creek apartment complex where Laub had died. This geographical proximity strengthened the suspicion that Tinoco might be responsible for her death. Detectives questioned Tinoco about his potential involvement in Laub's death, hoping he would confess, just as he had done in a separate case involving Heather Miller. However, Tinoco denied any involvement in Laub's death and refused to cooperate. As a result, the police had to gather evidence to link Tinoco to the crime. With his parents' apartment located directly across from the Timber Creek complex, the police obtained a search warrant. During the search, they found a black hoodie and cam pants in Tinoco's room, which they sent to the lab for analysis. The lab report results with no DNA match found. While there's no concrete evidence linking Tinoco to Nicole's death, he's clearly responsible for attacking Heather Miller and showed no remorse, even taking pride in his actions during his trial. In a new interrogation, investigators used Tinoco's ego to their advantage, suggesting that if he confessed to Nicole Labeb's murder, he would gain respect from other inmates in prison. The detective implied that owning up to the crime would make him appear more formidable, rather than just a coward who attacked a woman from behind. After a brief silence, Tinoco began to open up about Nicole. He claimed that he didn't intend to kill her, but rather wanted to experience the feeling of stabbing someone. According to Tinoco, his goal was to hurt Nicole, not take her life. He described how he had seen Nicole parking a golf cart and carrying a balloon in a small package to an apartment on the second floor of Timber Creek, which is located near his apartment. Nicole was attacked when she went upstairs and then came back down. Tinoco hid behind a golf cart, then ran to the stairs and stabbed Nicole when she descended. He chose Nicole because she seemed like an easy target. When questioned about his intentions, he admitted that he had considered forcing Nicole into a sexual act, just as he had done with Heather Miller. However, he claimed that he didn't follow through with this plan because Nicole screamed loudly after being stabbed, prompting him to flee the scene. During a reenactment of the crime, Tinoco demonstrated how he escaped from the scene. Chris Lobb, Nicole's husband, was shocked to learn that the person responsible for his wife's death was only 17 years old. As a father of a 13-year-old daughter, Laube found it incomprehensible that someone just 4 years older than his daughter could commit such a heinous crime. The trial started in 2015. Tinoco confessed to the crime during the interrogation, but he claimed he was innocent in court. His lawyer argued that there was no DNA evidence linking Tinoco to the crime scene. The lawyer asked for mercy for Tinoco, who was 17 years old and severely mentally ill, and hoped that treatment could help him change his behavior. The defense presented only one witness, a psychologist who evaluated Tinoco and found that he exhibited symptoms of schizophrenia. However, another psychologist from the Oregon State Hospital disagreed, saying that Tinoco had a personality disorder, not schizophrenia. The jury was convinced of Tinoco's guilt after watching a video of his confession and an experiment where he recreated his actions at the time of the crime. Jamie Tinoco provided details during a reenactment of Nicole Laub's crime that only the perpetrator would know. This led to a guilty verdict on all counts in 2017. The jury was tasked with deciding Tinoco's sentence, choosing between life without parole or life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. However, they found insufficient mitigating circumstances to warrant the option of parole, resulting in a sentence of life without parole. Before the official sentencing, Circuit Judge Kirsten Thompson allowed Tinoco to speak. With his attorneys by his side, Tinoco apologized and asked for forgiveness. Chris Lobb, Nicole's husband, recalled that Tinoco's family approached them after the sentencing to offer condolences and apologize. However, in 2021, the Oregon Court of Appeals overturned Tinoco's conviction, citing changes in juvenile laws. At the time of the crime, Tinoco was automatically referred to adult court due to the nature of the offense. New reforms now allow for offenders between 15 and 17 years old to be tried in juvenile court, rather than being automatically referred to adult court. A new law requires prosecutors to request a hearing to decide if a juvenile's serious crime case should be moved to adult court. This change affects the overturned conviction of Tinoco in the Nicole Laube case. Although Tinoco remains in prison, his defense may try to reduce his sentence if he's retried and reconvicted. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Heather Jackson. Heather Jackson was 23 years old in 2012, and her life was a challenge. She had recently separated from her husband, Wayne, and they were in the process of getting a divorce. They had 2 young children, 3-year-old Selena and 1-year-old Wayne Jr. Despite the difficulties they faced as parents, Heather was determined to provide a happy life for her kids. She had found a new home on a quiet street near Lake Erie, which brought her some sense of relief. Heather and Wayne had been high school sweethearts, but their marriage had fallen apart. On September 8, 2012, Heather's friend Danielle Sorrell arrived at her house at 2:30 p.m. for a prearranged meeting. However, when Danielle knocked on the door, no one answered. She checked all the doors, but they were locked, leaving her wondering what was going on. Danielle was puzzled that Heather and her kids weren't at home despite their planned meeting. Even if Heather had changed her plans, she would have alerted Danielle. So, Danielle called Heather's mom, Jody, who was very close to her daughter and spoke with her daily. However, Jody couldn't reach Heather that day either. Danielle then contacted all of Heather's friends, but none of them knew her whereabouts. Her concern grew when she spotted Selena's pacifier on the porch. Danielle knew Heather would never leave the house without the pacifier, so something was off. Hours passed, but Heather still hadn't contacted her mom. Jody's unease called the police to request a check. The officers arrived, knocked on the door, and got no response. They circled the house, peeking through the windows, but saw nothing suspicious. Since they found no signs of forced entry or foul play, they couldn't enter the house without a warrant and left. At approximately 7:30 p.m., Heather's friends, Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, arrived at her house after discovering she was missing. When no one answered the front door, Reiner proceeded to the back porch, forced the door open, and entered the home. Inside, they found Heather's naked body in the bedroom and immediately called 911. Sergeant Eric Graybill, a Sandusky police officer, responded to the scene and entered the house. He discovered Heather's body lodged between the box spring and mattress in her bedroom, with a ligature around her neck. The TV was still on, but the children were nowhere to be found. Their room was empty. During their search of the house, the officers noticed a utility closet door that they had not yet checked. When Sergeant Bill opened the door, he found stacked boxes with objects behind them. Behind the boxes, he discovered the lifeless bodies of Heather's children. The police immediately secured the crime scene. The officers were deeply shaken by the discovery, having never encountered a crime of such magnitude before. Heather's family and friends were even more devastated after the forensic examination results were revealed. According to court documents, Dr. Diana Scala Barnett, the deputy coroner for Lucas County, performed the autopsies on the 3 victims. Her findings showed that Heather Jackson's cause of death was ligature strangulation. Additionally, Dr. Barnett observed that Heather's rectum was unusually open after death, suggesting that an object was likely inserted into the area around the time of her death, causing it to remain in that state. Dr. Scala Barnett testified that both Wayne Jackson and Selena Jackson also died from ligature strangulation. She noted that Selena's underwear was rolled up, indicating that the body had been redressed. Selena also had a rectal dilation similar to her mother's, again indicating that something was in her rectum at or about the time of death. Julie Cox, a forensic scientist at the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, testified that there was seminal fluid on the anal swabs obtained from Selena Jackson. Cox also noticed a stain in Selena Jackson's underwear, so she cut a small portion of that stained area for testing and determined that it contained a sperm cell. The police were determined to quickly catch the monster responsible for the crime. Since Heather's house was located next to Firelands Regional Medical Center, investigators obtained footage from the building's surveillance cameras, which they hoped would lead them to the perpetrator. Reviewing the CCTV footage, they identified a car that drove up to Heather's house at 10:57 p.m. Although the camera was far from the house and the darkness made it difficult to see, the car's headlights provided some clues about what happened. The footage showed the car backing into the driveway and remaining there for 11 minutes. At 11:08 p.m., the headlights turned on again, and the driver departed. Meanwhile, Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, the men who discovered Heather's body, were brought to the police station for questioning. The investigators questioned them separately, starting with Dan Reiner, who had called 911. Dan and Heather were friends, and when Dan discovered she was missing, he went to her house to look for her. He had to push the door hard to get in. After calling 911, the police asked Dan for a DNA sample, which he willingly provided. The results are nothing special, and he was released. The police then questioned Thomas Hansen, who claimed to have spoken with Heather on the phone the previous night. He said he drove to her house around 11 p.m. but didn't go inside. Instead, they chatted briefly outside, and then he left. This revelation helped the police identify the driver of the car seen on CCTV footage, Thomas Hansen. Hansen also revealed that he didn't enter Heather's house because she wasn't alone. There was a man with her, someone Hansen knew as Josh. Hansen's account matched Reiner's, stating that when he learned Heather was missing, he went to her house to investigate. After releasing the initial suspect, the police shifted their focus to a new suspect, Josh Case, who was at Heather's house on the night of her death. They quickly located him and brought him in for questioning. Josh admitted to knowing Heather for years and being at her house that evening, where they watched TV while the children slept. He also claimed to have gone to the store to buy breakfast for the kids, returning to the house before a friend picked him up at around 1 a.m. Josh acknowledged having consensual intimate contact with Heather. Investigators verified his alibi by reviewing the store's CCTV footage, which confirmed he entered the store at 11:20 p.m. While this corroboration supported his testimony, it did not rule out the possibility that Josh might still be involved in Heather's tragic death. Heather's last known contact was with Josh Case, making him the prime suspect. He provided a DNA sample, which was compared to the DNA found on the victims' bodies. The results eliminated Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner as suspects, as their DNA did not match. However, Josh's DNA matched the DNA on Heather's body, but not on her children's bodies, indicating another person was present that night. This was not surprising, as Josh had previously admitted to an intimate relationship with Heather. The police now focused on finding the DNA of the second person involved. They quickly ruled out Heather's husband, Wayne, who was going through a divorce with Heather and lived in another state. The investigators turned to Heather's cell phone records for answers. The records showed Heather was active on her phone, including on the night of her death. Her last phone conversation took place at 3:12 a.m. and lasted 30 seconds. The police's next step was to identify the owner of the phone number Heather last spoke to. 36 hours after Heather's death, police obtained another CCTV footage that showed a white car arriving at her house around 3 a.m. This timing coincided with when Heather stopped using her phone, suggesting a possible connection. The car left about an hour later, by which time Heather, Selena, and Wayne were likely already dead. Although the footage was not clear enough to reveal the license plate, investigators identified the car as a Cadillac. Further investigation led police to the owner of the phone number Heather had called before her death. The number belonged to 41-year-old Curtis Clinton, who had a 30-second conversation with Heather at 3:12 a.m. A background check on Clinton revealed a disturbing history. He had been released from prison in February after serving 13 years for 2 counts of felonious assault and manslaughter. Clinton had pleaded guilty to the 1997 death of 18-year-old Misty Keckler, who was found strangled, naked, and bound in a bathtub. The similarities between Keckler's death and Heather's raised concerns among investigators, especially given that Clinton had been released from prison just 6 months before Heather and her children's deaths. This raised the possibility that Clinton had returned to his violent ways after his release. Curtis Clinton became the prime suspect in the murder of Heather and her children, and the police urgently needed to locate him to prevent any further harm. The police visited Clinton's last known address but were unable to find him. However, they soon discovered a white Cadillac parked on a nearby street. A search of the vehicle revealed a receipt from a gas station dated the night of the crime. The investigators reviewed the gas station's CCTV footage, which showed Clinton purchasing water and beer while appearing calm. This was after the time Heather and her children were killed. The police were received information that a patient named Curtis Clinton had been admitted to a local hospital. They immediately went to the hospital, found Clinton, and arrested him, taking him into custody at the police station. Clinton denied any involvement in the deaths of Heather Jackson and her children. He admitted to having dated Heather for 5 months and having an intimate relationship with her. According to Clinton, Heather had many personal problems and had asked him for financial and emotional support. He claimed that he didn't know her children well. Clinton initially stated that he last saw Heather on Thursday, September 6th, when he gave her $328 and they had intimate contact. However, when the investigator showed him phone records indicating that he had spoken with Heather at 3:12 a.m. on September 8th, Clinton corrected himself, saying that it was actually Friday night or early Saturday morning when he last saw her. Clinton claimed that he didn't stay long at Heather's house, dropping off the money and then leaving after their intimate encounter. He couldn't recall what time he arrived home. Clinton suggested that someone else must have gone to Heather's house after he left, as Heather had mentioned receiving an irritating call or text while he was with her. When confronted with the fact that he was the last person to have contact with Heather, Clinton expressed doubt. Curtis Clinton was arrested and jailed after his DNA was found on the victims. In a recorded call to his mother, Clinton expressed regret and confusion, saying he wished he'd sought help. He also hinted at a violent temper, suggesting it could happen again. His mother acknowledged the family's struggles, but said they'd learned to manage them, and noted that Clinton had stopped taking his medication, which contributed to his behavior. Clinton told his mother that he planned to plead guilty to the charges and accept whatever consequences came his way. The investigation led to multiple charges against Clinton. Furthermore, it was discovered that just 6 days before the murder of Heather and her children, Clinton had attacked a 17-year-old girl, choking her and forcing her to engage in intimate contact. The victim had gone to the hospital, where police collected DNA evidence that also linked Clinton to the crime. Clinton asked to move the trial to a different location, claiming that the local media had already publicized the case so much that it would be hard to find impartial jurors. However, the court denied this request. Clinton brutally murdered Heather, Selena, and Wayne, and the forensic evidence, including his DNA found inside Selena's body, revealed the horrific details of his crimes. Despite facing the death penalty, Clinton did everything he could to avoid it. When given the opportunity to speak before being sentenced, he did not show remorse or apologize to the victims' families. Instead, he attacked prosecutor Kevin Baxter and vowed to win on appeal and have his case retried. In November 2013, Clinton was sentenced to death for the brutal murders of Heather Jackson and her 2 young children. The judge also sentenced Clinton to life in prison without parole for what he did to 3-year-old Selena before strangling her, and added another 10 years for assaulting a 17-year-old girl 6 days before killing Heather and her children. Friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Sarah Pappenheim. Sarah Pappenheim was born on January 30, 1997, in Minnesota. She was the second child of Donnie Odegaard and Jerry Pappenheim, with an older brother named Josh. The siblings developed a strong bond as they grew older. When Sarah was in 2nd grade, her family relocated from Minneapolis to Redding, California. She graduated from Foothill High School in 2015, where she was an active member of the school band and played the drums. Sarah was passionate about music, especially drumming. She was a skilled drummer and regularly played at jam sessions in Redding. As one of the few female drummers, she stood out on stage. When Sarah was 18, she moved back to her hometown in Minnesota with her mother and brother after her parents got divorced. There, she continued to play drums at different venues and eventually met Bernard Allison, a famous blues guitarist and singer. Allison was impressed with her skills and invited her to join him on stage occasionally. By the time Sarah turned 19, she had become a local celebrity among blues fans, known for her bright smile, which earned her the nickname Ronald McDonald. Meanwhile, her brother Josh was struggling with depression and mental health issues after their parents' divorce. Tragically, on an ordinary day in February 2016, the police arrived at their doorstep and delivered devastating news to Sarah's mother. Josh took his own life at the age of 20, leaving his loved ones, especially his mother Sarah, heartbroken. The bond between Sarah and Josh was incredibly strong, and his passing devastated her. To cope with her loss and to help others who struggle with mental health, Sarah decided to study psychology. She had been in touch with Nico Carson Major, who lived in the Netherlands, and she moved there to pursue her studies. At Erasmus University in Rotterdam, Sarah began her psychology program with Nico's support, who not only helped her navigate her grief but also assisted her with her studies as a native speaker. Sarah's passion for music never faded despite her focus on studies and work. She stayed in touch with Bernard Allison, a musician she had performed with, and shared her dream of buying a drum kit. In January 2017, Bernard's band toured Europe, and on Sarah's 20th birthday, January 30th, she attended Bernard's concert in Germany with Nico. Bernard spotted her in the audience, invited her on stage, and let her play the drums with them, just like old times. Sarah lived on the third floor of an apartment complex near the university in Rotterdam. As 2018 drew to a close, she planned to spend Christmas in the United States and booked a flight for a week before New Year's Eve. However, on December 12th, her life took a devastating turn. When a police officer appeared at her doorstep, just like in 2016 when her son had passed away, Sarah's legs began to shake. She instinctively knew what the officer was about to tell her, but couldn't bear the thought of losing another loved one. When the officer informed Sarah's mother that her daughter had passed away, she was overcome with grief and lost consciousness. This devastating news came just a year after the loss of her son, who had died at the age of 20. Sarah was only 21 years old. Sarah lived in a student complex on the third floor, where she rented an apartment with her roommate, Joel Schelling. Joel was also a musician, and music was the common interest that brought them together. Unlike Sarah, who was outgoing and always smiling, Joel was more reserved and had a temper. Despite their occasional quarrels, Sarah remained a supportive friend to Joel, often calming him down when he became angry. However, the situation took a turn for the worse over time. Just 6 days before her death, Sarah confided in her friend Adam Pryor that she was afraid of Joel, who had threatened to harm 3 people he disliked. Sarah knew she had to go to the police. Just a couple of days before her death, she had spoken to her mother on the phone about her concerns. Sarah's roommate, Joel, was behaving in a way that was increasingly bothering her. Her mother advised her to find a new place to live as soon as possible and to avoid Joel until she could move out. On December 12, 2018, at 12:20 p.m., the police received a call from Sarah and Joel's next-door neighbors, who reported hearing a loud fight and then Sarah screaming. When the police arrived, they found Sarah lying on the floor with multiple stab wounds. Despite attempts to revive her, Sarah died from her injuries. The police immediately began searching for Joel, who was nowhere to be found. Neighbors reported that he had left the apartment in a hurry, taking a large double bass with him. This distinctive instrument became a key detail in the police's description of Joel. Less than 2 hours after the crime, 23-year-old Joel Schelling was arrested at Eindhoven train station, about 60 miles from Rotterdam. He was on his way to visit his parents, who lived in Eindhoven. After Joel was arrested, he made a shocking confession to his mother while on the train. He told her that he had taken Sarah's life. The judge subsequently placed Joel under arrest for 14 days to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Meanwhile, forensic experts conducting the autopsy on Sarah's body found 27 stab wounds, with several of them on her neck, abdomen, and back. 2 days after Sarah passed away, her mother, Doni Odegaard, traveled to the Netherlands to arrange for her daughter's body to be returned home. However, this required raising $40,000, a task that was made possible by the generosity of strangers who cared for the family. Upon learning of Joel's arrest, Doni Odegaard inquired if her daughter had contacted the police. Sarah had instead reached out to social workers, who visited Joel and found him calm. However, the next day, Sarah again contacted social services due to Joel's erratic behavior, including hitting himself with a hammer and threatening to harm multiple people. The case against Schelling began in March 2019. Schelling was accused of causing Sarah Pappenheim's death and admitted his guilt. However, he claimed he did not remember the actual act of taking her life. According to Schelling, he recalled fighting with Sarah, but his next memory was of being in the shower, cleaning himself. Sarah's mother, Doni Odegaard, attended each hearing, relying on an interpreter to understand the proceedings. During the trial, Schelling stated that he suffered from delirium and heard voices in his head. However, when asked if these voices had instructed him to fight with Sarah, Schelling said he did not know and could not recall. He also could not remember the cause of their fight. Prior to the verdict, experts testified that Schelling suffered from multiple disorders and required long-term treatment. Despite this, they concluded that Schelling was responsible for Sarah's death. The verdict was announced in December 2019. Sarah Pappenheim's death occurred before she could receive a response to her second request for support, after her initial request for assistance from social workers went unresponded due to the specialist's unavailability. The medics concluded that Schelling was aware of the initial fight and scuffle with Sarah, and had the opportunity to either stop the altercation or grab the knife. By choosing the latter, he should be held accountable for his actions. The prosecutor requested a 10-year prison sentence, but the judge in Rotterdam gave Schelling a 6-year prison term, followed by an indefinite sentence in a psychiatric hospital. The court reduced the sentence from 10 years due to Schelling's relatively young age and his significantly diminished mental capacity at the time of the crime. This means that the court did not consider Schelling fully responsible for his actions. When handing down the sentence, the court released a detailed explanation stating that, although the crime was severe and unpredictable, Schelling's serious psychological disorders made it likely that he would commit another violent crime. The court noted that Schelling suffers from chronic psychological disorders that require ongoing treatment in a clinical setting. The court viewed psychiatric detention as a punitive measure for Schelling, who has expressed a willingness to undergo treatment for depression and other disorders. The court has ruled that Schelling will remain in treatment until it determines he is well enough to be released. The court will review his status every 2 years. Additionally, Schelling has been ordered to pay €68,700 in compensation to Sarah's family. Doni Odegaard is outraged by the sentence, believing it is too lenient. She thinks Schelling should have received a minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. In her opinion, Schelling would have faced a much harsher sentence in the US, such as life imprisonment or the death penalty, which would have prevented him from committing a similar crime in the future. She is also concerned that Schelling may be eligible for parole in as little as 4 years and vowed to do everything in her power to keep him behind bars. An investigation was also conducted into the social workers who had interacted with Sarah. The investigation concluded that the social workers could not be held accountable for failing to identify Schelling's disorders because they did not possess the necessary expertise to make such a diagnosis. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicholas Wilcox. Nicholas Wilcox, a 39-year-old man from Putnam, Connecticut, lives in a duplex apartment, a popular property type in Florida that is designed for 2 families, with separate rooms, yards, and entrances. Isabella, a 38-year-old woman from Brazil, was the first person invited to rent one of the vacant apartments by Nicholas Wilcox. She used to work as a flight attendant for a national airline in Brazil. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to America with her children and later married an American, which helped her obtain a green card. Isabella's marriage ended in 2016, and she started dating Eric Robinson, a 46-year-old man from Massachusetts who had never been married and had no children. Despite their romantic feelings for each other, their relationship was occasionally turbulent due to their passionate nature and Eric's bachelor lifestyle. According to Isabella, Eric's behavior was inconsistent and unpredictable, switching between cheerfulness and aggression without warning. This led to repeated breakups and makeups. By June 2017, they had separated once again, shortly before Eric and Isabella moved in with Nicholas. Initially, the living arrangement worked well, with Nicholas and Isabella and Eric respecting each other's space while also spending quality time together. However, over time, problems arose. It was discovered that Eric was using and storing illicit substances, which explained his erratic mood swings. This behavior led to Eric's arrest on August 23, 2017. Nicholas was fortunate to have a steady stream of work, unlike Isabella, who struggled to find a suitable job. To make ends meet, she started helping her neighbor in the construction business. It's worth noting that Nicholas's family had a long history of working in similar trades. His grandfather was a fisherman and boat builder, while his father dedicated his life to construction. After graduating in 1996, Nicholas joined the family business, becoming a roofer. He worked alongside his older brother, Donald, as contractors, building their own client base. At 23, Nicholas started a family with his high school classmate, Kathy. They had a daughter a year later, and twins 3 years after that. Throughout this time, Nicholas worked hard to provide for his family. Despite his busy schedule, friends and acquaintances remembered him as a devoted husband and father. However, his dedication to his professional pursuits may have contributed to the eventual breakdown of his family. They divorced shortly after the birth of their younger children. Despite this, Nicholas continued to support and communicate with his family. In 2017, Nicholas made a fresh start by moving to Florida to pursue better job opportunities. The new location proved to be a smart choice, as he saw a significant increase in clients. Unlike his previous seasonal work, Nicholas was now able to earn a steady income almost year-round. As a professional, Nicholas's skills were in high demand in Florida, where powerful hurricanes frequently damaged homes along the coast during storm season. His expertise was needed to reinforce and repair homes, which helped him build a successful business. Despite leaving his family back in Connecticut, Nicholas remained committed to caring for his children from a distance, sending them financial support and visiting whenever possible, as per his agreement with his ex-wife. After living in a multi-apartment complex in Fort Lauderdale, Nicholas moved to the suburbs to lower his housing costs. This is when he met Isabella. As the hurricane season began, Nicholas's workload increased significantly due to daily orders. At the same time, Hurricane Irma was approaching the area where Nicholas lived and worked. An emergency was declared, and about 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. To prepare for the storm, Nicholas spent his time reinforcing homes, boarding up windows and doors, and later clearing the debris left behind. Nicholas's main job was to help people, and he got paid for it. But he wasn't in it just for the money. His older brother said that Nicholas always lent a hand to those in need. In September 2017, Florida was bracing for a devastating hurricane. Nicholas spent the day boarding up windows with plywood to prepare. As a result, there was a shortage of plywood in stores, leading to long lines of people waiting to buy some. At that time, Nicholas met a woman named Pamela, who was struggling to find materials to protect her home. Nicholas promised to help her, and that evening, he delivered the 7 sheets of plywood she needed. He then spent the whole day boarding up her doors and windows, refusing payment for his efforts. Nicholas was deeply sympathetic to Pamela's plight as a single mother in need of assistance. In response, he offered her help, and she was extremely grateful. This sparked a romantic connection between them. The devastating hurricane that followed brought Nicholas a substantial amount of work, which allowed him to employ his neighbor, Isabella, as his assistant. Isabella's responsibilities included cleaning up job sites and handing Nicholas tools as needed. As they spent more time together, their friendly interactions blossomed into romance. On September 3rd, they made a commitment to each other, sealing their promise with a handwritten vow in blood, symbolizing their desire for a long, happy life together, filled with many children. The lovers, Nicholas and Isabella, faced minor issues and disagreements soon after their union. These disputes escalated, culminating in a serious conflict on September 22nd, which led Isabella to leave home and spend the night in a hotel. However, they reconciled the next morning. According to Isabella, Nicholas was neglecting her and showing a lack of respect. Nicholas, on the other hand, believed she was exaggerating. Their disagreements ultimately led to severe consequences. On October 5, 2017, a mysterious call was made to the local police. The caller claimed to be Isabella's former husband and asked the police to contact Isabella, stating she had information about a recent crime. However, he didn't provide further details. The police responded promptly and called Isabella, who sounded hysterical. When questioned about the situation, she claimed everything was fine, except for a fight with her boyfriend, Nicholas. Isabella told the police that her partner had left her and driven away, but when they mentioned a call from her former husband, she broke down and confessed that her partner was actually dead. She claimed to know where the body was and offered to show them. When the police arrived at the address Isabella provided, they found a house that was being prepared for a hurricane, with all windows and doors boarded up. Inside, they noticed a strong smell of cleaning products and paint, indicating that one of the bedrooms had been thoroughly cleaned. However, upon closer inspection, the detective suspected that someone was trying to cover something up. The walls and floor had been hastily and sloppily painted, and they found containers of hydrogen peroxide, which is often used to clean bloodstains. They discovered small bloodstains on the bedding and bedside table, and it was clear that the old mattress had been replaced. The police found blood stains throughout the room, suggesting a violent crime had taken place. Isabella had attempted to clean up the scene but hadn't finished before the police arrived. Isabella was discovered inside the duplex, visibly distressed, and explained that she had been under the influence of a sedative during the phone call with her ex-husband, which accounted for her unusual behavior. Despite her initial confusion, Isabella confirmed that she knew what had happened in the room and where the body was located. Due to her unstable state, the police decided to take her to the station for further questioning. Meanwhile, the police had spoken with her ex-husband again, who provided a partial account of the events. According to Isabella's ex-husband, she had called him and told him about the crime. However, during her interrogation, Isabella claimed that her former boyfriend, Eric Robinson, was involved in the crime. She stated that on October 5th, around 2 a.m., Eric had arrived at the duplex, found her and Nicholas asleep, and became enraged by a vow hanging above the bed's headboard in the bedroom. Eric woke Isabella by holding a knife to her throat, threatening to harm her if she screamed. As he did, she saw Nicholas, who was lying next to her, struggling to breathe. But Eric didn't allow her to look any further and forced her out of the bedroom. Then, he brutally beat Nicholas, who was defenseless, using a brass knuckle and a bat. After the beating, Eric wrapped Nicholas' body in a tarp and tied it up with straps. He threatened Isabella, forcing her to help him get rid of the body. Later, the detectives were confused as to why Isabella, instead of calling the police, had called her ex-husband. In an explanation, Isabella said she was terrified and sought comfort and guidance. According to her, Eric also made her clean up the crime scene and erase all evidence. Before leaving, he returned her phone, which he had taken earlier. Her confession raised doubts and required further investigation. Additionally, the detectives noticed visible bruises and scratches on Isabella's body, which she claimed were a result of Eric beating her after Nicola's death. The investigation started with a search for the victim and the suspect, who revealed the location of Nicholas. While medical examiners worked on the body, forensic specialists arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, law enforcement searched for Eric, who had been released from prison on October 3rd and was living at a different address. During this time, Eric had met a woman, Merida, and was staying with her. Merida told the police that on the night of October 5th, her boyfriend received a phone call and left immediately. He returned around 5 a.m., packed his things, and left again without explanation. When asked if she noticed any bloodstains on her boyfriend's clothes, Merida said she hadn't seen anything suspicious. Eric was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles away from the house. He refused to cooperate with the investigation and was taken into custody for further inquiry. During the interrogation, Eric provided a different account of the events than Isabella's. According to Eric, Isabella had contacted him on the night of October 5th, despite having a restraining order against him. Isabella attacked Nicholas while under the influence of banned substances and ultimately ended his life. After regaining her composure, she realized she needed help and asked Eric to assist her. In exchange, she promised to rekindle their relationship and start anew. Eric, still having strong feelings for her, agreed to her terms. The investigation revealed that Isabella was not as innocent as she seemed. She had a history of police encounters, and on September 22nd, a heated argument with Nicholas got out of hand. Under the influence of Xanax and other substances, Isabella became violent, destroying some of Nicholas' belongings and damaging his work vehicle. Fearing for his life, Nicholas contacted the police. Although they reconciled the next morning and Nicholas dropped the complaint, investigators discovered Isabella's history of erratic behavior, including a conversation with her ex-husband that shed more light on her past. He described Isabella as having a volatile personality and a hot temper. During their argument, he had threatened to report her to immigration services if she continued to behave in such a manner. For Isabella, the opportunity to live in the U.S. was crucial, so the threat of deportation was devastating. It's possible that during another argument, Isabella's explosive personality led her to react violently, motivated by her desire to stay in America. To gather more information, detectives started interviewing people close to them. A neighbor who lived in the adjacent duplex proved to be a crucial witness. She reported seeing Eric arrive at the scene in his car on the night of the crime. He then retrieved some tools and trash bags before leaving the area. The investigation continued, with substantial evidence collected. On October 11th, Isabella was called in for another interrogation, which she attended voluntarily since she had not been arrested at that point. Detectives reviewed video surveillance footage and determined that on the night of the incident, Isabella personally moved Nicholas's body and disposed of it in a trash container. During this time, she remained calm and composed, making decisions independently. She also met with Eric Robinson that night. Isabella appeared relaxed and friendly. She even purchased items needed for emergency repairs herself. However, as the investigation progressed, she began to change her story, adding new details about the events. Isabella claimed that Eric had threatened to kill her and deport her and her children, forcing her to act as she did. Although her statement seemed believable, investigators were cautious in their conclusions. Both Eric and Isabella had questionable pasts, which raised suspicions. Eric, in particular, had a history of run-ins with the law, dating back to 2001, primarily for possession and distribution of narcotics. In August 2016, Isabella had legitimate reasons to fear Eric in question, as he had committed an aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was arrested for strangulation and later that year for possessing prohibited substances. Eric's neighbors were terrified of him due to his aggressive and unpredictable behavior, and they actively avoided him. On October 14, experts discovered traces of Isabella's DNA on the Nicholas body, contradicting her claim of not having touched Nicholas. This evidence suggested that she was involved in the violent crime against her lover, at the very least in disposing of the body and eliminating evidence. Despite the evidence, neither Isabella or Eric admitted to any wrongdoing. While Eric was held in custody, Isabella was briefly detained before being released to await trial. Although everyone expected the court proceedings to begin soon, various complications and delays pushed the trial back by 5 years. The trial of Eric Robinson was significantly delayed due to the bureaucratic issues. During this time, the prosecution developed its strategy and tactics, while the defense thoroughly reviewed the investigation findings. Additionally, new evidence was discovered, including the recovery of Eric's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime with his former friend. As the trial approached, Isabella made a plea deal with the prosecution. She agreed to testify against Eric Robinson. On April 10, 2023, the trial finally took place. The prosecution argued that Eric was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas, while Isabella's role was presented as a witness who tampered with evidence and helped eliminate traces, a crime in itself. The trial was marked by several cancellations due to legal complexities, but resumed after a week. Throughout the trial, Eric was charged with premeditated murder. Despite inconsistencies in Isabella's testimonies, her attorney maintained her innocence. The prosecution emphasized witness statements describing Eric's unusual behavior on the night of the crime. Specifically, Eric used his new girlfriend's car, which didn't have GPS tracking, to avoid detection. He also left his mobile phone at home to prevent tracking. Separately, other case details came to light. After the crime, Eric and Isabella were together in a room nearby, where they were intimate. Isabella later explained her actions, stating she was under the influence of strong sedatives at the time and also feared for her life after what had happened. The motive behind the brutal and senseless murder of Nicholas was revealed to be jealousy. Although Isabella had ended their relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. When he was released from prison, he returned home to find that significant changes had taken place in his absence, which only fueled his rage and hatred. During this time, Eric plotted his revenge against his perceived rival. He committed a cold-blooded attack while Nicholas was asleep and vulnerable, sealing his fate with the first strike. Eric then attempted to cover his tracks by scattering evidence in various locations. The murder weapon was later found in a landfill, and Nicholas's body was discovered wrapped in tarpaulin and hidden in a trash container. Isabella, following Eric's instructions, painted over the blood-splattered walls and cleaned the area to conceal the evidence. Ultimately, 51-year-old Eric was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for second-degree murder. Isabella was found guilty of aiding Eric, but the court considered threats and coercion as mitigating circumstances. As a result, she received a suspended sentence and is on probation until 2026. Isabella was willing to do whatever it took to gain U.S. citizenship. Just 10 days after Eric was incarcerated, the parties signed another agreement in which Eric promised to marry Isabella. However, he failed to follow through on this promise. It seems that Isabella is willing to marry anyone as long as it helps her maintain her status. All the men she has been involved with have been used for her own selfish purposes, and she has manipulated them into considering marriage. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Tracy Hawlett and J.B. Beasley. J.B. Beasley, born on July 31, 1981, in Troy, Alabama, to parents Cheryl and Hilton Lanier Beasley. After her parents' separation, Beasley moved to Dothan with her mother in 1984. She was deeply loved by her mother and stepfather, Joey Begun, whom her mother married a few years later. Beasley grew up in a comfortable home in Dothan, Alabama, with her 4 sisters. She developed into a sociable young woman with a wide range of interests, including cheerleading, dance, piano, and swimming. She also worked as a model, along with her sisters, for several agencies. Despite her many pursuits, she valued time spent with friends and family. In high school, Beasley befriended Tracy Hallett, a fellow cheerleader. They quickly became inseparable. Tracy Hallett was born on March 3, 1982, to Carolyn and Robert Hallett. Her father, a member of the Dothan Police Department, tragically passed away when Tracy was just 5 years old. Her mother, Carolyn, later remarried a man named Mike Roberts, who helped raise Tracy Hallett alongside her mother. Tracy Hallett was a shy but selfless person who always put others before herself. She was particularly protective of her 2 younger brothers and took her responsibilities as an older sister seriously. Like Beasley, Tracy Hallett attended Northview High School, earning good grades and participating as a cheerleader. As Beasley and Tracy Hallett were transitioning into adulthood, they were unaware of the tragic events that would soon shatter their hopes and dreams. On the evening of July 31, 1999, around 10:05 p.m., they friends left Dothan in J.B. Beasley's black 1993 Mazda 929, heading to a birthday party in Headland, just a few miles north. However, their unfamiliarity with the roads soon led them into difficulty. Beasley and Tracy Hallett started their trip but took a wrong turn shortly after leaving their hometown, becoming lost. At around 10:30 p.m., they stopped at a BP gas station in Headland, near the intersection of routes 173 and 431, to get directions. From the gas station's payphone, they called their friends to get clearer directions to their party destination. However, after continuing their trip, they found themselves in Ozark, Alabama, approximately 24 miles northwest of Headland, rather than their desired location. At 11:30 p.m., they realized they were still lost and pulled over at the Big Little store to get their bearings. Although the store was closed, Tracy Hallett used the payphone to call her mother, explaining that they had gotten lost and were now in Ozark. She updated her mother on their plans to return home rather than continue their search for the party. A woman named Marilyn Merrick and her daughters pulled into a gas station to buy a soda. Tracy Hallett and Beasley approached them, asking for directions to Dothan. Marilyn did her best to explain the route, and they seemed to grasp it. She noticed that they appeared to be well-mannered and were driving a clean and tidy car. As Marilyn watched, they followed her directions, pulling out of the parking lot and turning right. On August 1, 1999, Tracy Hallett's mother filed a missing person report with the police around 8 a.m. Investigators quickly began searching for Tracy Hallett and her friend, Beasley, who had not been seen since the previous night. Their first lead came when police discovered Beasley's car parked on Herring Avenue in Ozark. The vehicle showed signs of recent use, with an almost empty gas tank despite being filled the day before. The car was also dirty and had a partially rolled down driver's side window, yet the doors were locked with no signs of forced entry. Inside, police found Beasley's driver's license on the dashboard, along with 8 purses and cash, which suggested that the disappearance was not a result of a typical theft or robbery. The investigation into She's initially focused on finding Beasley's car keys, as they were the only reported missing item. However, there was no sign of either Tracy Hallett or Beasley. A suspicious palm print on the locked trunk of Beasley's car heightened the police's concerns that something was terribly wrong. Although they suspected the trunk might hold important clues, they couldn't access it without the keys. It took 6 hours for the police to realize that the trunk could be opened from the inside using a latch, eliminating the need for the car key or a locksmith. Upon opening the trunk, the officers made a disturbing discovery. The lifeless bodies of the girls were found inside. Both victims were fully dressed, but their pants were soiled below the waist. Each girl had a single gunshot wound to the head, with Tracy Hallett shot in the temple and Beasley in the right cheek. Tracy Hallett had suffered injuries consistent with a violent struggle, including a 9mm shell casing lodged on her leg, scratches on her arm, and thornbriars tangled in her jeans. Despite the gruesome nature of the crime, investigators believed that they were likely killed while inside the trunk of the car, and that their deaths were not the result of a random attack, but rather an intentional act. As the families of the victims were notified of the tragic discovery, the authorities formally launched a homicide investigation. Initially, detectives considered robbery as a possible motive, but this theory was quickly dismissed when they found that the victims' personal belongings, including purses, jewelry, money, and credit cards, were still inside the car. Autopsies revealed that they had no alcohol or drugs in their system, and there was no evidence of sexual assault. This led investigators to rule out the possibility that the crime was motivated by sex. However, a subsequent report from the State Crime Lab, issued more than 2 months later, found traces of unknown semen on Tracy Hallett's clothing and skin. The palm print found on the trunk lid remained unidentified, with no matches in the database and no suspect to compare it to. As a result, authorities had limited leads to pursue. Despite the widespread attention the double murder of the teenagers received, investigators were no closer to identifying a suspect. A month after the discovery of Beasley and Tracy Hallett's bodies, a surprising breakthrough occurred. Johnny William Barentine, a 28-year-old Ozark resident, visited the Ozark Police Department on September 1st and shared a remarkable account. He claimed to have witnessed the double murder, stating that he had seen the incident on the same night as the crimes, around the time Tracy Hallett made a call from the Big Little Store's payphone. According to Barentine, he had been out buying milk for his 2-year-old son when he stumbled upon the horrific event. He returned home at 1 a.m., visibly upset, and told his wife that he had been in a collision with a black truck near Herring Road. After sharing this incident with friends in the days that followed Tracy Hallett and Beasley's murder, they encouraged him to report it to the police. They suggested that this information might be connected to the murders and could help the police solve the case, ultimately leading to the reward. During a 4-hour interview with Ozark police, Barentine's account of the events surrounding the killings changed 6 times. Initially, he told police that on the night of the murders, he saw a black truck speeding away from the area where the bodies were found. However, as the interview progressed, his story continued to evolve and change. Eventually, Barentine claimed that he had given a ride to a tattooed man he didn't know, and they drove past the Big Little Store together. He then testified that the man got into the car with 2 girls, whom he identified as Tracy Hallett and Beasley. According to Barentine, the man forced they out of the car on Herring Avenue. A confrontation took place between the man and they as they tried to escape. After putting they in the trunk, Barentine reported seeing something in the man's hands just before hearing 2 gunshots. The man then returned to the car, and Barentine drove him away from the scene before heading home. In a different account, Barentine confessed to investigators that he knew the man he had given a ride to and identified him as his neighbor. Notably, Barentine lived less than a mile from where the police found the victims' bodies. Johnny Barentine was named the prime suspect in the murders of Beasley and Tracy Hallett, but his story raised several red flags. He failed to mention any sexual activity that would explain the semen found on Beasley's clothing and body. Additionally, the neighbor he implicated had a solid alibi for the time of the crime. Barentine's appearance in his mugshot also seemed suspicious, as he looked startled and disheveled, as if he had just been awoken from a deep sleep. Despite these inconsistencies, police initially believed they had the right person. However, Barentine soon confessed that he had fabricated his entire story to collect the reward money. Surprisingly, at the preliminary hearing on September 21, Alabama Bureau of Investigation agent Charles Huggins testified that Barentine was able to accurately describe her clothing and other details consistent with the crime scene, which suggested that he may have had some knowledge of the events. After his arrest, Barentine was held in the Dale County Jail in Ozark without the possibility of bail. At a bond hearing on October 18, Barentine claimed he was not involved in the killings. He told the judge that he had not picked up a tattooed man and had not witnessed anything on the night of the murders. According to Barentine, he had gone to the BP station around 11 p.m. to buy milk for his child and later fabricated a story to collect the reward money. The judge denied Barentine's request for bond, and he returned to jail. Despite the challenges, Barentine's family continued to support him. They gave interviews to the media, stating that he was innocent and incapable of harming anyone. Barentine's lawyer, Bill Kimmons, also maintained his client's innocence, stating that the prolonged interrogation had taken a toll on him, causing him to become entangled in his own web of deceit. During police questioning, Barentine was not informed that he was free to leave or use the bathroom at any time. His defense team highlighted that he had limited education, having only completed the 7th grade and part of the 8th grade, and was in special education classes, which suggested he lacked the capacity to plan a complex crime. He was eventually released from jail on December 17, 1999, when DNA evidence revealed that his DNA did not match the semen found on the victim's body and clothing. In January 2000, a grand jury in Dale County declined to indict Barentine, effectively clearing him as a suspect in the double murder. The investigation suffered a setback after Barentine's clearance, and the methods used by investigators were criticized. Questions arose about the Ozark Police Department's ability to handle the case. Despite this, the police still had several potential suspects under consideration. A Michigan man was considered a key suspect due to his proximity to the scene and suspicious behavior. He was in the area on the night of the murders and attended a party near where Beasley's car was found. Within days, he left town, raising suspicions. Investigators made 3 trips to Michigan to interview him, but he was unable to provide a solid alibi for hours on the night of the murder. Police were initially interested in 2 key leads, a person of interest whose DNA didn't match the crime scene, and a driver of a small white pickup truck captured on surveillance footage. The video showed the truck at the gas pumps at the same time the victims, Beasley and Tracy Hallett, were nearby at the payphone. However, no record of a gas purchase existed, and the video was of poor quality, making it impossible to clearly identify the driver or determine if anyone got out of the truck. The police released a photo of the truck a month later, asking for the public's help in identifying the driver. Unfortunately, no one came forward with any information, and the lead eventually disappeared. The investigation's last lead was a man from Mississippi who had been arrested in Jones County on an outstanding warrant for possessing drug paraphernalia. He had been visiting relatives in Ozark, but departed 2 days after the murders. Investigators wanted to question him, but ultimately, he provided no significant information. Due to lack of evidence, they were forced to release him. In March 2000, a woman came forward, claiming she heard screams and 2 gunshots near Highway 123 South, just inside the city limits, on the night of the murders. She admitted she had been scared to report it earlier. Police searched the area based on her description and found a 9mm bullet, the same type used to kill they. However, the bullet's brand did not match the brand of the bullet shell casing found on Tracy's body. The unspent bullet found no useful markings for forensic comparison to other evidence, ruling out another potential lead in the case. Despite this and other dead ends over the years, investigators remained hopeful for a DNA match. As the families of Beasley and Tracy Hallett tried to move on with their lives, the case eventually went cold. Years later, new information rekindled the investigation. In 2015, a bombshell accusation shook the case. Rena, an auxiliary police officer with the Ozark Police Department, came forward and publicly accused a fellow officer of murdering Beasley and Tracy Hallett and implicated others in a cover-up. Rena made several disturbing allegations regarding the Ozark Police Department. She claimed that on July 31, 1999, a police officer stopped Beasley and demanded to know the location of cassette tapes containing incriminating conversations about the police department's involvement in cocaine trafficking. According to Rena, this confrontation led to the tragic murder of two innocent teenagers. Rena further alleged that she was threatened by multiple law enforcement officials who knew the identity of the murderer but helped cover up the crime by destroying evidence. Specifically, Rena accused three officers, Gary Butch Whittington, Rex Tipton, and Eddie Henderson, of harassing and intimidating her. She also implicated the former police chief, Tony Spivey, who led the original investigation, in the cover-up. However, Rena declined to reveal the name of the officer she believed was directly responsible for the murders. American journalist John B. Carroll wrote that the officer likely assumed they girls planned to use the tapes as evidence in a court case set for August 2, 1999, just over a day after their murders. Carroll also reported that Rena was brutally beaten with a baseball bat after coming forward, which prevented her from revealing the actual killer. Law enforcement officials accused by Rena denied any involvement in the murders of Beasley and Tracy Hallett. Due to a lack of physical evidence, none of the officials were ever formally named as suspects in the case. Despite this, online allegations against them spread quickly on true crime websites and social media. As a result, Keith Coffin, Rex Tipton, Tony Spivey, Eddie Henderson, and Gary Butch Whittington from the Ozark, Alabama Police Department sued Rena Crum, John B. Carroll for defamation in 2016. The case was later dismissed in 2018. In May 2016, Rena Crum was convicted of harassing Beasley's sister over several years and received a suspended sentence and a $250 fine. Despite an extensive investigation that spanned 2 decades, including numerous interviews and DNA samples, authorities were unable to identify a suspect. It wasn't until 2019 that advances in DNA technology finally led to a breakthrough. In March 2019, investigators sent the DNA evidence found on Beasley's body in clothes to a specialized lab in Virginia called Parabon Nano. The lab used public genealogy databases to analyze the DNA and found a match, leading them to identify a suspect named Coley McCraney. McCraney, 45, was not previously a suspect in the 1999 murders of Beasley and Tracy Hallett, but DNA evidence now implicated him in the crime. McCraney was born in Alabama and graduated from Carroll High School in Ozark in 1992. During his time in high school, he was an athlete and also served as the president of the library club. After graduation, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force and served from 1993 to 1997. In 1992, McCraney was married, but they separated 2 years later. They eventually divorced. His ex-wife filed a complaint with the Air Force in 1994, alleging that McCraney had assaulted her. McCraney later remarried in 2001 and had children with his second wife. In 1998, he was found to have failed to pay child support, but otherwise, he had no significant criminal record over the past 20 years. McCraney worked as a truck driver throughout his career, employed by several Alabama-based trucking companies over the years. More recently, he co-founded a church and worked as a bishop. At the time of the 1999 murders, Coley McCraney was 26 years old and living in Ozark, just 1 mile from where the bodies of Beasley and Tracy Hallett were found. Nearly 20 years later, on March 15, 2019, McCraney was arrested in Daleville, Alabama, following a traffic stop. During his subsequent interview with police, McCraney claimed to not know the victims. However, the investigators did not reveal any motive for the murders. The news of McCraney's arrest sent shockwaves through the Ozark community, including its police chief, Marlon Walker, who had attended school with McCraney. As the case seemed to be finally unraveling, a new development emerged. Rena Crum, a 53-year-old woman who had previously accused the Ozark Police Department of covering up the murder, withdrew her allegations during an August 2022 hearing. McCraney, 49, is currently in Dale County Jail awaiting trial on 5 counts of capital murder for the shooting deaths of Beasley and Tracy Hollett. His bond was denied, and his trial is scheduled for April 17, 2023. The families of the victims expressed relief that the alleged killer has been apprehended, but they still face the difficult process of reliving painful memories during the trial. McCraney was ultimately found guilty of the murder and rape of Beasley and the murder of Hollett. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Diane Holick. Diane Tammy Holick was born in 1958 in New York City and was known to her friends and family as a hardworking and joyful person. Her work ethic led to financial stability and her successful career. For over 20 years, she worked at IBM, a leading global technology company. In 1996, she relocated to Austin, Texas, where she held a senior position that allowed her to work remotely from her home office. Diane purchased a luxurious home in the suburbs of Austin and lived a privileged life, often hosting wine tastings, dining at upscale restaurants, and frequenting dance clubs. She was also involved in charity work and made efforts to improve her personal life. However, her life took a turn in mid-November 2001 when a severe storm warning was issued for Texas, bringing heavy rain and tornadoes to the Austin area. As a result, Diane worked from home on the morning of November 16th, but suddenly became unresponsive during a scheduled work call. Diane had multiple phones, but she wasn't answering any of them. Her co-workers left messages asking her to call back, but when she didn't respond, they grew concerned. They contacted the police department and requested that someone check on Diane at her home. When the officers arrived, Diane's neighbor offered a spare key, allowing the police to enter the house. Inside, they found an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of dogs emerging from the kitchen. As the police searched the house, they found Diane's body in the bedroom on the second floor. The detectives were called to the scene, and they were struck by the unusual cleanliness of the crime scene. There were no signs of theft, struggle, or forced entry. Diane's body was fully dressed and lying next to her bed. The detectives quickly realized that they were dealing with a crime. The investigation revealed distinct strangulation marks on Diane's neck, likely caused by a rope or similar object. Her wrists also showed signs of being bound with cable ties. The cleanliness of the house, the lack of stolen valuables, and the absence of forced entry led the detectives to believe that Diane's killer was someone she knew and trusted. They suspected that the killer was someone she had let into her home voluntarily. An investigation into Diane's death revealed no signs of forced intimacy, but detectives did find suspicious dark spots and red stains on the carpet near the bedroom entrance. A towel on the back of the sofa in the living room caught their attention due to its mismatch with the otherwise clean and orderly surroundings, prompting them to send it to the laboratory for examination. Diane's acquaintances reported that she had no known enemies, and the police discovered that she was in a romantic relationship with Dennis Conley, a man she had plans to spend her life with. Diane had been married before, but that marriage ended quickly. She met Dennis through a dating service, and he had 2 children from a previous marriage. Dennis was a businessman living in Houston, 150 miles from Austin, where Diane resided. Despite the distance, Diane and Dennis formed a close bond, with Dennis proposing to her after 2 months with a valuable platinum ring. However, according to Diane's friends, the relationship began to decline recently. Diane had been feeling controlled by Dennis at times. Diane was also troubled by the decision to relocate to Houston, which meant leaving her home in the suburbs of Austin. She put her house up for sale, but realtors struggled to find a buyer willing to pay the asking price of $435,000. This led detectives to suspect that Dennis might be involved in Diane's death, prompting them to invite him to the police station for a conversation. Dennis agreed to speak with them without a lawyer. The medical examiner determined that Diane died sometime between 3 p.m. on November 15th and 3 a.m. on November 16th. Notably, the wedding ring Dennis had given her was missing from her finger, while her other jewelry remained untouched in the bedroom. This raised questions about the killer's motives and whether the ring was removed to mislead investigators. During the police interview, Dennis appeared to be a grieving man. He was asked about his relationship with Diane and his whereabouts on the day of her death and the day her body was found. Dennis claimed he was in Houston at the time. He stated that he last spoke with Diane on the morning of November 15th and spent the rest of the day at work without contacting her again. When he couldn't reach Diane the next morning, he left a message on her voicemail. The police took Dennis' fingerprints and DNA sample, but ultimately cleared him as a suspect after verifying his alibi. He had not left the city, so the detectives had to expand their search for a new lead. Further inquiry revealed that an unknown man had inspected Diane's house a few days before her death, claiming to be a potential buyer. He had planned to return with his wife to make a joint purchase decision. This clue became a top priority for the police, who began questioning the owners of properties for sale in the area, hoping that someone may have seen this mysterious buyer. Several women in the area reported that a suspicious man had visited their homes around the time of Diane's murder. He, described as being 35 to 45 years old with a large nose and dark hair, had arrived unaccompanied by a real estate agent. 6 of the women refused to let him in, but one allowed him to enter and view her home. She who let him in reported that he acted strangely, showing no interest in the layout of the house or its features. Instead, he specifically asked to see the bedroom on the second floor. When she became uncomfortable and asked him to leave, he introduced himself as Walter Miller. The police searched their databases for anyone matching the name Walter Miller, but the individuals they found did not match his age or appearance. A forensic artist created a sketch of the suspect based on the women's descriptions. Diane's killer removed the cable ties that had bound her hands, but the rationale behind this action is unclear. Did he know his victim personally? A subsequent autopsy revealed no evidence of forced intimacy or assault, yet the police remained vigilant, returning to the crime scene to search for potential traces of semen. However, these efforts yielded nothing. A police sketch of a potential suspect in the Diane Holick case was broadcast on the evening news, urging anyone who recognized the person to come forward. One of the few leads investigators had was a towel from Diane's house with a few short hairs on it. But the hairs were rootless, making it impossible to obtain a complete DNA sample. A woman contacted the police after seeing the sketch and reported a similar encounter. She and her husband had put their house up for sale 6 months prior, and a man had come to visit, claiming he wanted to buy the house for cash and needed to see it first. However, she refused to let him in, and he left. 2 months later, the same man returned to her doorstep and introduced himself as Jim Taylor. She was home alone with her young daughter, as her husband had just left for work. He asked to look around the house, but she denied his request again. This time, he became angry and aggressive, yelling and demanding to be let in. She immediately recalled the encounter and remembered writing down his name and the license plate number of his minivan. The police now had a crucial lead to investigate. A search of the vehicle's registration revealed that the owner was not Jim Taylor, but Patrick Anthony Russo. Initially, Russo seemed like an unlikely suspect. He was a married man with 2 children, lived 40 minutes outside of Austin, and was a member of a church music band. However, A deeper look into his past revealed a disturbing history of violent crimes against women. Russo had been convicted of a series of attacks, including one that involved abducting and attempting to strangle a victim with cable ties. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison but was released on parole after serving only 8 years. While in prison, he met his future wife, Janet, a church volunteer. The police found it hard to believe that Russo's connection to the case was mere coincidence. The police visited Anthony Russo's house with a search warrant, and he seemed unsurprised by their arrival. Although they found no evidence of Diane's belongings, including her ring, in his house or minivan, a neighbor reported seeing a similar vehicle at Diane's house on the day she died. In the utility room, investigators discovered cable ties identical to those that left marks on Diane's wrists. However, these ties are widely available at hardware stores. The police asked Anthony to come to the station for further questioning, where they inquired about his whereabouts on November 15th and 16th. Anthony claimed that on the 15th, he drove to Austin to visit a religious radio station but was unable to enter because no one answered the door. Notably, the radio station was near Diane's house. He stated that he left the station around 4 p.m. but got lost due to a hurricane, arriving home around 6 p.m. This alibi is questionable, as the forensic medical expert reported that Diane died between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. Russo was questioned by the police about whether he was looking to buy a house. He claimed he had not inquired about any properties for buy, which would later prove to be an important statement. When shown a photo of Diane, Russo remained impassive and denied having met her. With no evidence connecting him to the crime, the police had no choice but to release him. However, when detectives investigated further by visiting a radio station Russo had mentioned, they discovered that his previous statement was a fabrication. The employees at a local business explained that they didn't lock the doors during a tornado warning because a large crowd had gathered in the lobby. Meanwhile, a woman who was selling her house contacted the police after encountering a man who resembled the suspect in a recent crime. She had been at home with her child when he came to her door, claiming to be interested in buying a house. He was holding a pamphlet with real estate listings, including her own home. She allowed him into her home, but when she showed him a bedroom, he attempted to attack her. However, he quickly fled when he heard her child crying in the next room. She retained the pamphlet, which was later given to the police. They found a clear fingerprint on the pamphlet, which belonged to Anthony Russo. Russo denied ever looking at houses for sale, but the fingerprint proved he had lied to the police. Russo's false statement was a misdemeanor, and since he was still on probation, it was a violation of his parole conditions. The police arrested him, fearing that he might flee while they searched for evidence linking him to the death of Diane. To ensure public safety, the authorities decided to keep Russo in custody. The police were able to locate 15 women who had showed homes to a man who matched Anthony Russo's description. All 15 women were asked to identify the suspect from a lineup of 5 men who were similarly dressed and had similar appearances. However, only 10 of the women were able to positively identify Russo as he who had visited them to view homes. The remaining 5 women were unable to make an identification. Despite this, the police still had reason to believe Russo was involved in the crime and brought him in for further questioning. During the interrogation, Russo continued to deny any involvement in the crime, but eventually stopped answering questions and requested to see his wife. Meanwhile, the police received the results of a DNA analysis from the laboratory. The results showed that a hair found on a towel at the victim's home matched Russo's DNA profile. While this was a significant piece of evidence, it was not conclusive, as there was a small chance that the hair could have belonged to someone else with the same DNA profile. Despite the accumulation of circumstantial evidence, the police still lacked a direct link between Russo and the victim's death. Investigation revealed 2 key pieces of evidence that implicated in Diane's death. Firstly, Cell phone data placed Russo in the same area as Diane on the day she died. Secondly, a thorough examination of Russo's home computer uncovered a disturbing search history. Russo frequently visited an adult website where he consumed content explicitly depicting strangulation during intimate activities. Furthermore, the website required subscription, indicating that Russo actively sought out this material and was willing to pay for it. 2 days prior to Diane's death, Russo had accessed a particular story on the website that told the tale of a man who, under the guise of being a buyer, infiltrated a lonely woman's home, strangled her, and then stole valuables to make the crime appear as a robbery, thus disguising his true motive of satiating his desire for strangulation. Detectives delved into Russo's financial life and found he and his wife had a mere $2,000 in savings and were still making mortgage payments on their current home, clearly indicating he was in no position to buy a new house. Without concrete evidence, police arrested Russo and charged him with the murder of Diane Hollick nearly 2.5 years after her death, which took place on November 15, 2001. In court, 14 women testifying under oath that Russo had approached them about viewing homes, often visiting them in person on the day of the murder. Notably, these women all matched a specific profile, suggesting Russo had been observing them beforehand. While most refused him entry, one woman allowed him in initially but soon asked him to leave due to his strange demeanor. Russo's interest in homes was not random, as he specifically sought out homes occupied by women of a particular age group. The prosecution presented evidence that Russo visited homes for sale, often targeting women who lived alone. Russo visited Diane's house again, likely at her invitation, but this time with a specific intention. He had planned his actions carefully to avoid leaving any evidence. On a rainy day, Diane offered him a towel to dry off, which he casually discarded on the back of the sofa. As she showed him around the house, Russo attacked her on the second floor. Prosecutors believed that Russo derived pleasure from the act of strangulation, which ultimately led to Diane's death. Before leaving the scene, Russo took cable ties and Diane's wedding ring, which were never found by the police. He used a spare key hidden at the front door to lock up behind him. This was the prosecution's version of events. At the trial, Russo's current and former wives testified that he had a history of enjoying the act of strangulation. It's worth noting that Russo had a prior conviction for a similar crime. After deliberating for 11 hours, the jury found Patrick Anthony Russo guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, but never admitted to his guilt, despite his history of similar crimes. Russo will become eligible for parole again and can submit his initial petition in 2044. At that point, he will be approximately 80 years old. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicholas Billingham. Fiona Beale was a kind and friendly woman who was devoted to her job and adored by her students. She lived with her partner, 42-year-old Nicholas Billingham, in Northampton, a large town in England. Fiona and Nicholas had been together for 17 years and, like many couples, they experienced their share of highs and lows. Leslie, a friend of them, described them as content. Leslie recalled that she had thought Fiona was really nice. Leslie mentioned that they hadn't displayed overt affection but seemed happy. Nicholas's history with women suggested that his relationships were often short-lived. His relationship with Fiona ended abruptly in November 2021, but it wasn't due to the usual reasons. The breakup occurred after they were required to isolate themselves for 10 days. After the breakup, Nicholas maintained contact with his friends and family, revealing to his mother that he had left with a woman named Faye and was happy with his new life. Meanwhile, Fiona completed her 10-day isolation period, recovered and eventually returned to work. She received supportive messages from her colleagues when she returned to work. However, the split had a lasting impact on her. By the end of February 2022, nearly 4 months after the breakup, her mental health began to decline significantly. The memories of Nicholas in her Northampton home became overwhelming, so she decided to move to Cumbria, a 200-mile distance from her previous home. On March 15, 2022, her family grew concerned after reading her text messages. Their worry prompted them to contact the police. The police found Fiona severely injured in a bath at her Lake District Lodge rental. Officer Josh Parkin testified in court that when he arrived, ominous music was playing from her phone, and he initially thought she was dead. Parkin described the scene, stating that he had found a completely naked female lying in the bath. Music was playing from a mobile phone next to her. He immediately called for an ambulance and suggested they try to get her out of the bath to administer CPR. She then became partially conscious. To check her responsiveness, he had pulled her ear firmly, and she had moaned, trying to turn over. They had sat her up, and she had become emotional. Parkin had discovered a blue leather-bound notebook with a logo on the front. A quick glance had revealed it was a personal document detailing her mental health struggles at the time. Fiona's notebook revealed a dark history of abuse and a sinister plot. She wrote about her husband Nicholas's cruel behavior, including spitting on her and threatening her during intimate contact. She started planning her revenge as Tulip 22, a reckless and ruthless alter ego. Fiona described how she planned and executed the murder, using a knife and an eye mask to carry out the crime. She hid the body in the bathroom and later moved it to the garden, where it was buried under multiple layers of materials. The police initially dismissed Fiona's notebook as ramblings, but upon re-examining it, they found disturbing details that led them to investigate further. They searched Fiona's house and found a blood-stained mattress in the cellar. On March 19th, forensic officers and a cadaver dog discovered Nicholas's remains in the garden, wrapped in carpet and buried under various materials. Fiona's notebook revealed her regret and apology for the crime, but also her anger and hurt towards her husband. The body was found with a sleep mask covering the eyes, bearing the phrase, "This is my morning after" face on the inside. The police spokesman described the scene as showing utter contempt, as the body was wrapped in cables, hose pipes, and plastic bags, mixed with debris from a building. An autopsy was conducted the day after the discovery. The results confirmed that the cause of death was a single stab wound to the right side of the neck, damaging the right jugular vein, esophagus, and trachea. The injury was inflicted with moderate force. Following the investigation, police arrested Fiona Beale on March 22, 2022, charging her with the murder of Nicholas Billingham. Nicholas's family was shocked and heartbroken when they learned of his death, particularly after discovering that Fiona had sent texts to them and Nicholas's friends from his own phone. Following the police investigation into Nicholas' death on November 1, 2021, it was discovered that Fiona attempted to cover her tracks in the days that followed. As part of her plan, Fiona claimed to infection, which would have given her a 10-day period of isolation, during which she would not be disturbed. Fiona's actions during this 10-day period were inconsistent with the severe symptoms she claimed to be experiencing due to the infection. On November 2, with Fiona using Nicholas's Amazon account, and later her own, to purchase various cleaning supplies, including products for Venetian blinds, a new mop and bucket, heavy-duty trash bags, a new mattress, bedding, clothing, wall art, and mirrors. Later that day, Fiona made changes to her order, adding 3 rolls of duct tape to a delivery that already included multiple cleaning products. She also made a separate purchase at 2:19 p.m., buying heavy-duty gardening gloves, a stainless steel digging spade, and a garden incinerator. These items would later be used to dispose of a body. Nearly 2 weeks after Nicholas's death, Fiona went shopping again. On November 13th, supermarket cameras caught her buying various items, including building materials that she would later use to construct a grave. The police released the CCTV footage of this shopping trip. Fiona also impersonated Nicholas by sending texts to his family and friends for several months. She even invited Nicholas's mother to visit her at home. Nicholas's mother, Miss Valentine, reported that Fiona had invited her over for a Christmas drink on December 23, 2021. Unbeknownst to Miss Valentine, her son's body was buried in Fiona's back garden at the time. Fiona Beale appeared to be living a normal life, showing no signs of depression or trauma after the incident. During the trial, Fiona initially denied any wrongdoing but later admitted to taking Nicholas's life, claiming it was an involuntary act. However, the prosecutor disagreed with her account. He presented evidence that Nicholas had been unfaithful to Fiona throughout their 17-year relationship, cheating on her with multiple women. Despite Nicholas's infidelity, Fiona had taken him back on multiple occasions. The prosecutor revealed that one of Nicholas's affairs had resulted in a child. Instead of leaving Nicholas, Fiona allegedly planned and executed murder, carefully considering how to kill him, dispose of his body, and cover her tracks. She also prepared explanations for his disappearance and her own absence from work on the day of the crime. Defense attorney Andrew Wheeler addressed the jury after the prosecution's opening argument, stating that Fiona had struggled with her mental health for years due to Nicholas Billingham's controlling behavior. He emphasized that Fiona, a 49-year-old woman with a good reputation, was a hardworking and well-liked school teacher who had been in a 17-year partnership with the victim. Wheeler asked the jury to consider how someone with Fiona's good character could commit such a crime. Wheeler stressed that the key issue in the case was her state of mind at the time of the killing. Wheeler explained that Fiona had struggled with her mental health for years and suggested that Nicholas Billingham's psychologically dominating behavior had gradually worn her down. Fiona Beale admitted her wrongdoing. She then shared details about her personal life and relationship with Nicholas at Northampton Crown Court. Fiona revealed that she had been prescribed antidepressants during her university years. She described Nicholas as caring and attentive at the start of their relationship, but claimed he gradually changed over time. Fiona alleged that Billingham's behavior became increasingly controlling, particularly when it came to cleaning. She recalled an incident where she had left a cloth with cleaner on it, which stained a worktop. Although it seemed minor at first, cleaning became a major issue throughout their relationship. Instead of laughing off mistakes, Fiona said she would get scolded by Billingham. She also described how meal times became rigid and inflexible, with everything having to be exactly as Nicholas wanted it. Over time, this behavior escalated and continued until the end of their relationship. Even small things, like the way items were placed in cupboards, became a point of contention, with Nicholas insisting that they face outwards. Fiona testified that Nicholas's behavior escalated from joking insults to cruel comments, which made her lose confidence. She also shared that before taking Nicholas's life, she warned him that she would kill him if he ever treated another woman the way he treated her. The judge stated that considering the severity of the crime, he sentenced Fiona to a minimum of 20 years in prison.